At dawn, the water gardens were a hush of pale colors, bathwater blue pools and the first pink of day combed thin across the sky. The palm fronds were still, the tiled walks still cool from the night, and the only sounds were of small feet and small voices from the children at the basins and the chitter of sparrows in the date trees. Oberyn moved through the colonnade with a spear balanced across his shoulders, his hands resting easy on the ashwood shaft. The air, even before the sun lifted over the low rim of the world, tasted faintly of salt and pomegranate rind. He was barefoot. The stone gave back the memory of night like a favor. The Morning Star boy who had been sent to fetch him from the guest tower slept on his feet between two blue-glazed pillars. Oberyn let him sleep. He stepped down into the shallow pool where the children had not yet come, and the water, no higher than his ankles, closed over hot skin with the soft hissing pleasure of a long thirst. He set the spear upright and felt for the seam in the world that separated breath from quiet. The first cut of the spear point he made on silence rather than on air. He moved slowly and carefully, point and butt, a needle sewing through invisible cloth. The spear wrote a thin script in the surface of the pool. He was not thinking of killing a man, not of that, not first, but of the way a point entered anything, water or flesh, or the mistake in a man's stance. He had learned to watch before he learned to strike. In Dorne, heat taught you that much. It was Illyria's voice that found him, soft from the arcade. "Are you hunting ghosts, my prince?" Oberyn let the spear glide down. The water stroked his ribs. He turned, and the sight of her, hair still wet from a plunge, overscarf damp and clinging to one shoulder, filled him with a warm plainness he seldom admitted he craved. She moved like a woman who trusted ground and sky to hold their places. "Only one," he said, "and she hunted me first." Illyria stepped down to sit on the cool lip of the basin, one foot in the water like a child. She watched him with that keen amusement that had cut more lies than any blade. "You should let her go," she said. "Ghosts are greedy. There are better lovers." The spear came to rest across his forearms. "If I let her go," he said, "she will think she has one." He smiled to soften the words, because this was a morning and a morning should not be a dirge. "And besides, she reminds me of you. She is stubborn." Illyria shook the wetness from her hair so that a dozen fine brown curls sprang free. "I am not a ghost, and I am not stubborn. I am patient. There is a difference." She tapped his knee with her toes. "Come out." The prince sent a boy. "I saw." Oberyn set the spear on the paving and came out of the pool, leaving watery footprints that the sun would drink within minutes. Illyria reached for the towel and drew it down his back, and a man could be forgiven for thinking the gods had erred in not assigning her as a holy officer in some gentler faith. She kissed a burn scar at his shoulder without looking, as if she had kissed it every day and had always found it where it lived. "The prince wants you," she said. "Areo has a face like a closed door. The little maester is with them. Caliot, the one who fusses when you bleed on his napkins." "Then let him fuss," Oberyn said, and the smile he gave her was to reassure them both. "I will go and be scolded." "Wear sandals," she said, and he did, though the leather felt unnecessary and fussy. He let Illyria walk with him across the long tile of the gardens where colored fish chased one another under the water like flags in a current. Orphans of the greenblood splashed at the shallow pools, and a boy with hair like a dry reed called "Prince, Prince," and reached for Oberyn with wet hands. Oberyn lifted him lightly and spun him once, and the boy screamed delight and streamed water and was set down again with his smile broadened like a river mouth. Areo Hoda stood under the shade of a jacaranda and watched them with expressionless calm, a man whose face was a movement only when movement was needed. "Prince Oberyn," Areo said. He had been made to say Lord to highborn men more times than anyone ought, and had given up asking for words that fit. He named those he guarded by who they were to his prince. "The prince is in the Tower of the Sun." "Then I go toward fire," Oberyn said. Areo did not reply, but when they turned together toward the long causeway and the pale towers beyond, his heavy hand lifted a single finger toward the maester's little shadow, a warning that Oberyn laughed at softly because Areo had never had to warn him to be careful and always did. Ilaria brushed her hand against his for a slow second. "I will be where the little ones are," she said. "If you come back with anger, come hungry too." He climbed the steps to the Tower of the Sun with a feeling like sand collecting in a bowl inside his chest. The hall was cool and dark after the morning brightness, and his brother sat in the window seat where the sea threw flashes up the wall and lit his face one heartbeat at a time. Doran's foot was propped, bandaged, and the swelling made the skin shining tight. His hands were folded. There was a little plate of figs on the table near him, and he had eaten none. Caliot sat with a folded letter against his knee and the look of a man trying to make his diffidence look like modesty. "Brother," Doran said quietly, "my little viper." Oberyn bent and kissed him, cheek and brow, and felt the old weight of carefulness settle over the moment. "Say it," he said. "Say what it is that puts that look on Hodoa's face." Doran's mouth made a shape that was nearly a smile. "You have not changed." "I have changed every day," Oberyn said. "Do not deny me the work I have done." He moved to the table and took a fig and bit into the cool flesh. "The boy you sent fell asleep standing up. The water gardens are too. Kind of place for urgent news." "Perhaps the news is not urgent," Doran said. "Perhaps it is merely dangerous." He leaned his head back against the stone of the window embrasure and closed his eyes a single second, the way a man might take one mouth of air before diving. "You know of the heat in the Scourge's upper reaches? The Scourge is always temperamental," Oberyn said mildly. "A river true to its name. The Eulers blame the gods when their walls crack, and the gods blame the Eulers when the blossoms fail." "The news is not from the Eulers," Ario said from where he had become a piece of shadow near the door. Oberyn had known him long enough that he sometimes forgot the way Ario could erase his own danger by erasing his presence. "A caravan came from the deep desert by night. They say a shepherd was burned without a lick of flame to be seen." "Friction," Oberyn said around a mouthful of figure. "Or a quarrel with a jealous husband. Or the shepherd slept under a falling star and the star resented him." "Give me less poetry." "The man's bones were found in a shallow depression," Caliot said, his voice gentler than his words. "The sand around him vitrified. Glass, my prince. Not everywhere and not deep. But a bowl, a thin bowl, as if heat had pressed a hand down in the sand and smoothed it. The edges were crumbled by morning." Oberyn put the fig down, suddenly uninterested in sweetness. "How far?" "Beyond Vaith," Doran said. "Closer to the Brimstone's dry cousin than to any named place. A goatherd's track leads past a line of black stone outcrops that have not been there in living memory, if this memory is to be trusted." He opened his eyes and looked at the sea one long heartbeat, then turned that gaze on Oberyn. "Ghost Hill sent the first riders and then their messenger. They are more alarmed than the Eulers, which I find instructive." "Toland of Ghost Hill," Oberyn said. "Do they still keep their painted dragon to frighten sailors?" Doran's mouth warmed a little. "They do, and their banners still remember a trick that bought us time with a conqueror. Their Lady Nemella writes in a hand that laps at the sand like a tide. She asks if she may send the false dragon down the coast with flares and music to celebrate that the world has tired of quiet. Her humor is unfortunate." Oberyn leaned one hip against the table. "And you do not bring me news of glass bowls and false dragons unless you have something you held back for last. Show me the stone under the velvet, brother." Doran did not gesture. Ario moved without being asked and took from a chest a curved bundle wrapped in old cloth. The cloth was patterned faintly with sunbursts, and the fabric's edges were darkened where hands had held it many times. Ario laid the bundle down on the table, and the weight of it was wrong for iron or gold or any simple thing. Caliot lifted the corner of the cloth as a man lifts a veil, respectful because he had not been taught a different way to be. Under the cloth lay an egg the color of midnight turned with a slow fire. Its scales were tiny perfect plates, each one rimmed faintly in a red that was not paint and not rust. The thing breathed heat without moving. It was, even at rest, a promise. "Ah," Oberyn said softly, and his throat tightened in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "You kept a better lover than I imagined." I have kept it since our father died, Dorne said. He kept it since before that. I thought it a piece of Valyrian fancy, pretty, inert, and dangerous in the way only a symbol is dangerous. It has been cold for all my life. At sunrise yesterday, when the first light fell through that window and touched it, Caliot burned his fingernail on it, like a child touching a kettle. It warms, cools, it warms again. Caliot looked half ashamed, half amused at himself. He held up a finger with the nail edge blackened. I am only a maester, he said. I know something of metals and heat. This does not feel like a thing with a simple explanation. Oberyn reached but did not touch. The egg smelled faintly, if an egg could be said to smell, of old stone after rain. His skin prickled. He had seen a dragon skull in King's Landing once, a beast's head big as a cart, bone turned to some other substance under a hall of lanterns. He had poured wine into the hollow of a broken fong to hear the ringing and laughed at the echo. This was nothing like bone and everything like a heart. How did father come by it? He asked. Doran's eyes lowered, not guiltily but with the weight of knowledge that had sat alone in a chamber for many years. A thing given for a thing promised, and neither the giver nor the promiser lived long enough to keep the bargain. Nymeria brought stories with her on her 10,000 ships. Some of them were useful, some were clever, some were a lie told so often that the lie grew old and respectable. Among them was an old rumor with a name like a tale, that the Rhoynar carried away not only children and wives and songs, but also a coil of theft from the smoking shores of Valyria. An egg, Oberyn said. One. Only one, Doran. Or three or none, Doran said. But one is in this tower. It has slept here longer than you have been alive, and it sleeps less soundly now. Oberyn smiled without mirth. And you tell me this now because a shepherd burned in a sand bowl, and because Lady Nymella wishes to dress a wooden dragon in fireworks. I tell you because the sun warms that egg and the sand cooks no goat without fire, Doran said. And because if there is a god in the crookedness of fate, he is a god who takes pleasure in putting knives into the hands of men who have reasons. You have more reasons than most men. I have tried to live with mine instead of cutting with them. Today I confess I am not certain that was wisdom. Ario shifted his weight almost imperceptibly. It was his way of speaking when speech had to be coaxed. If a heat is rising beyond Vaith, he said, the Eulers will ride it like drunk men ride a story. The Fowlers will want to fence it behind a pass and charge a toll. The Manwoodies will say it belongs to their ghosts. Lady Nymella will try to make a comedy. If the thing hatched in Dornish sand, all the other sands will say the wind owes them their portion. If it hatched, Caliot said. If, Doran said, and looked at Oberyn, and in that one syllable lay a decade of arguments, another decade of the silences that had followed. A dragon is what every story makes of it. A weapon is only a weapon in the hand of a man who will use it. Oberyn stood very still. He thought of a woman with a laugh like warm rain that had fallen on a cooler city, and of two small bodies wrapped in crimson and gold that had not belonged to them, and of a man so large that the room had seemed to lean toward him when he moved. He thought of a skull turned into a bell under which every day he had lived had been rung. It had been years, and the bowl inside his chest had not dried. Sand kept collecting in it. Some men called that grief. Oberyn had learned to call it thirst. There was honesty in the word. You do not tell me no, he said. I tell you nothing, Doran said. You are my brother, and you will do what you do. But hear this. If you bring the sun closer to us, we may all be burned. Fire does not bargain with caution. It does not care for the cleverness of our plans. Oberyn smiled again, and this time it was cleanly. Fire cares for air and for fuel, and I have never had trouble finding either. He lifted the egg. He had thought to test it first with the back of his hand like a cook near a spit, but his hands were not built any longer for that sort of fastidiousness. He took its weight into his palms. Heat slid into his skin like a snake moving into its own hole. He did not flinch. Caliot made a sound, and Oberyn told the little man with his eyes that he might make 1,000 such sounds and still not be heard. The egg was heavy but not unwieldy. A spear weighed less and had broken more lives. You will not carry that through the water gardens, Areo said. The children will crowd you to touch it out of curiosity or to see you smile, and then you will drop it, and it will crush a toe or defeat your vanity. I will have a litter. I am not a lentairy, Oberyn said. No man ever reduced to a chair before he is dead will be reduced for a good reason. But he did not argue further because Areo did not argue from insult. Areo argued from the same sort of quiet that had been in the gardens at dawn. They carried it in a curtained litter that might have borne a sick woman or a visiting singer. Ilaria watched it pass without calling to him, and he loved her for that. The children chased for half a dozen steps and then forgot. It was a morning, and a morning had better things in it than a man's secrets. They kept the egg in a chamber near the tower's western face where the stone was thicker and gave back less heat. Caliot brought charcoal and a copper brazier and set it beneath a carved screen that filtered light to a soft green. When the brazier was lit and the lid set askew, the heat rose like a polite guest. Not too close, Caliot said, and Oberyn, to his surprise, felt himself trust the little man's caution. He turned and found Doran's eyes on him again and felt the old brotherhood like a belt he had not worn in a while, tight, uncomfortably comforting. Send for the Lady of Ghost Hill, Dorne said. Invite her to Sunspear. She will come for the gossip if not for the figs. And send to Vaith, not a letter, a man who sees with his own eyes. I will go, Oberyn said. Of course you will, Dorne said. You would go if I asked you to stay. You would go if I told you I would go. He smiled thinly. Take Ilaria. Take Obara only if you prepare to wrestle her spear away from her. Do not take Tyene. She will try to poison the egg to see if it can be frightened. Oberyn laughed then, the laughter that had kept him alive because it had kept him from turning into a blade he could not put down. I will leave Tyene to read to you from the seven-pointed star, he said. In the courtyard, the horses stood with their heads low, tails switching lazily. Ilaria's palfrey lifted her muzzle and made a sound like a question. The sky had cleared entirely. He could see the first false shimmer of heat above the dunes far to the east. Ilaria mounted lightly and looked down at him without speaking. He loved her more for her silences than for her talk. Both had saved him in different seasons. Obara came pounding out of a narrow stair, her spear across her back like a banner, hair already braided tight. You would ride without me? She demanded. Her mouth was a straight line when she wanted to be a soldier, and her eyes laughed when she did not. I would try, he said, and I would fail, and then we would ride, and you would scowl at me for the length of 2 canyons and 3 oases. She scowled at him now to give him the taste. If there is a fire in the desert, she said, why would we not bring a skin?
D'où pourrit-on?
Ilaria asked. Obara shrugged at that. Pragmatic cruelty became her sometimes like a cloak. They rode in the cool of morning into a day that would not forgive them for any errors. Dorne was a country that grew out of stony patience. The red mountains leaned their long, folded backs against the horizon like animals sleeping. The sand was the same as it had ever been, new every hour and older than any house built by any lord. The sky itself seemed to be made in Dorne for the purpose of teaching a man that his plans were tiny and his persistent desires would be dried into thin shining things and blown away unless he held them with both hands. They crossed the Greenblood by a flat ferry whose sun-baked ropes groaned. Orphans waved lazily from their boats, teeth very white in river-browned faces. A girl sang a verse, high and cruel, a boo. Tia Wolf Lord whose bones turned to chalk, and laughed when Oberyn tossed her a coin. He knew her mother by 2 names, and neither was the one the girl called her. That was the way of the river. The road along the coast fell away to a ribbon that wandered in and out of hard ground. They turned inland where a dry wash led toward Vaith, and the air grew brittle and brassy and clean as a blade. They stopped by a cluster of wind-sculpted rocks to let the horses breathe. Ilaria tipped water from a skin into her mouth and only then into her palm for a sip like a communion. Obara took nothing and glared westward as if impatience could call distance to heal. They should have sent for me sooner, she said. If something burns, you do not sit and make a poem about it. You piss on it. Some fires enjoy being pissed on, Ilaria said. It reminds them of the stupidity of men and they burn merrier. Oberyn stood apart a little and watched a lizard climb a stone. The lizard's body quivered vibrato under the heat. When his shadow touched it, it ran in a zigzag the color of fear. By the time they came upon the black outcrops, the sun had grown confident and assertive. The stone was not black by whim but by making. It had the look of rope poured out of a pot, frozen mid-pour. When he put his palm near it, his hand felt as if it hovered above a man's breath. He found the bowl where the shepherd had died by its wrongness. The sand there had been pressed and fused. A thin glaze of glass, crystalline and imperfect, cupped a depression the size of a man's torso. A goat's jaw with 3 teeth left lay nearby, scorched but not cracked. Flies discovered them all together, children late to a festival. Here, Ilaria said, and the word was a prayer without a god. She crouched and touched the glass with the uncurled knuckles of her first 2 fingers. She still wore the little golden bells at her ankle. The faintest chime went into the air and was swallowed before it could travel. Oberyn knelt. He had seen dragons only as histories, the skulls beneath the Red Keep, the tapestries at the manse of a merchant prince in Volantis who had wanted to be seen as a monarch of silk and lacquer, the pictures that lied to make the eyes happy. This was bare and without heraldry. It had nothing to prove. He felt heat lie against his cheekbones and knew, as he always had known, that the world would do what it wished and call it fate or accident as it preferred. "Look," Oberyn said and pointed, under an overhang of the black rope-like rock. The sand was disturbed in a way that did not look like the wind's writing. It looked like something had dragged itself out from beneath the world, or back into it. Oberyn crawled closer, the grit biting his knees even through wool. He put his face into the shadow and breathed heat that tasted like iron water. There, on the stone itself, were scratches in a curve and a little chip where something harder than this rock had bitten. He reached into the shadow with his left hand, the hand he used to do work without notices. His fingers touched something that made the hair on his forearm rise. It was not dangerous. It was simply that it was not the right temperature for this shadow. It lay there, half buried by sand, no bigger than his palm. A scale, or the topmost plate of a scale, so thin that when he lifted it, light came through the edges and made a faint red rim. He brought it out and set it in Ilaria's hand. She looked at it a long time without speech. Oberyn leaned in and the set of her mouth softened into something that did not belong on her. She looked like a child recalling a story about fire that had kept her sober in a cold. "If a false dragon," Oberyn said quietly, "then a very careful artisan." "Not false," Ilaria said. Her confidence was unforced and that meant something to him. A true thing does not argue for itself. It lies down and sleeps until the moment asks it to get up. The sun troweled heat into the back of his neck. He stood and looked at the black outcrops and the bowl of glass and the pointing tracks in the sand. A wind, faint and inconsistent, braided a strand of Ilaria's hair around her cheek. If a dragon had been here, and it was easier and easier to say if without wanting to laugh at himself, then it could be anywhere by noon unless it chose to stay. Dorne was a place where a thing could be within hearing at dawn and unreachable by noon. He had learned that in bed as well as on the road. "Camp where?" Oberyn asked, restless. Oberyn pointed to a strip of shadow, thin as a blade, cast by an overhang that would widen as the day turned. They spread a ground cloth there and sat where shadow and sun made a broken pattern like a chessboard. He sent Oberyn to a low rise with a spyglass to see if any dust plumes marked men coming. Ilaria set a pot on 3 stones, and the tea made the air smell like something remembered from a polite house that had once held a cruel man. "When I was a girl," she said, pouring him a cup, "my mother told me a story of a woman who gave a rich man her firstborn son to save her village from a river that had turned to salt. The man cut the boy's throat, and the salt made a crust on the wound and wouldn't let the blood run. The village went on living and the rich man married a woman who hated bread. There are so many things in our stories that should not be, and we live with them as if refusing to live would make it better." "Who was the woman?" Oberyn asked. "The river," Ilaria said. Obara came sliding back down the sand like a dog who did not mind dignity. "Dust," she said. "Only one plume." She recalibrated her irritation. 2. Oberyn drank the tea and felt its heat join the day's heat like an alliance. By the time the riders came into sight, he had set the egg scale in a little pocket he had not used in a long time. The men who arrived wore dull colors and faces that had forgotten how to be surprised. Vaith men, their sand-colored scarves pulled up over their noses, with their signet cut on a disc of bone at the neck. They looked at Oberyn and Obara and then the black rock and then down at the glass bowl in a sequence that told him they were making up their minds anew about what they believed in. "My prince," said the man in front, a captain by the feathering of his scarf. "We rode when the shepherd's child came screaming to the town. He is with us." He half-turned, and a boy revealed himself behind a horse's broad rump. 10 maybe, face crusted with dried tears and sand, eyes rimmed in the angry red that came of too much sun and not enough ain't. He had wrapped around his middle a rag that had once been white. He walked stiffly, carefully, as men walked with burned skin under their clothes. Oberyn went to a knee without ceremony and held out a hand. "How are you called?" The boy looked at him, suspicion a habit, and shrugged his shoulder to dislodge a fly. "Badal," he said. His lip pulled to the side a little when he spoke, a habit that would become a scar on his manner if he lived long enough. "Badal," Oberyn said. He said it so that the T and the L were flowers. "You came near the heat?" Badal's eyes went past him to Ilaria and Obara and then to the black stone. "I heard the goats scream." He spoke as if it were a commonplace. "Goats screamed all the time and men. My father said not to go to the dark rocks because they have a mother below, but the goats do not listen and the dog was stupid. We went." He stopped. He tightened his mouth, shook his head once, harshly. "It was not like a fire. When fire takes you, you smell it. This was like the sun wanted to sit on my face." "Did you see anything?" Ilaria asked, so softly that the word anything was a breath rather than a noise. Badal raised both hands as if to show emptiness. His palms were stripped and raw. Sand and the dog and the goats and then just light. The dog ran. My father did not. I pulled him by his belt. He was heavy. His face changed as he remembered saying something and hearing no answer. "Did you hear a sound?" Oberyn asked. He kept his body still. In a desert, a man learned that stillness was often what trust looked like from the outside. The boy looked to the black rock, to the glass bowl, to the strip of shadow where the three of them had made a temporary set of domestic comforts. "Like rocks grumbling at each other under the ground," he said finally. "Like something eating a small rock." He lifted his chin, fiercely brave the way children could be cruel. "My father would tell you I do not lie. He is..." He stopped there, too disciplined in his own pain to describe it. "The river was salt, and there was a boy, and there were men who will make up a good ending," Ilaria said in a tone that was not meant for the child and reached for her skin. She poured a little water into her palm, and the boy's tongue flicked like a lizard's as he stared at it. She was cruel enough not to raise it to his lips. "Drink," she said, and he bent and drank from her hand as if she were a god. "Did your father see anything else?" Oberyn asked. Gentle questions because the boy was not a scroll with neat edges. He was a body that would lie down tonight and shake. Badal looked at the back of his hand where a new blister was thinking itself into existence. "A tail," he said. "Ah," Oberyn said, and the sound was not the sound of a man who had been surprised by the world. He looked at the Vaith captain, who gave him a look in which deference and intelligence had reached an agreement. "We will make a camp," he said. "Tell your men to keep the children of the town away. Tell them not to tell the sand a story that will make it act proud. This one is ours." The captain nodded, and his understanding of ours could be felt like a weight on a scale. "My prince," he said, and meant what the words said. Oberyn and Ilaria and Obara stayed as the sun leaned deeper and the shadow of the rock widened like a true mercy. They watched. Men might have searched. Oberyn knew when to sit. The desert taught a person patience by example. Flies came and went.
Abit le spun in laborias circle.
The heat took up its housekeeping and did not apologize for any of its habits. The high sky went from hard blue to a softer fabric that hinted at gold. Just before the light began to spend itself in earnest, the air changed. It was nothing a man could have drawn for a map. It was something a girl would describe as a feeling. The heat stopped pushing. For a moment it pulled. The hard shell of cooled black rock above the overhang sweated. A single bead of some darker substance welled and fell and made a tiny hiss when it hit sand. Illyria's hand found Oberyn's wrist. He did not shake her away. In the hollow under the rock, sand quickened. It did not move like wind's work or like a man scooping with his hand. It heaved once in a single broad mild swell and sagged. A second swell. A sound, exactly as the boy had said, rock chewing on a smaller rock far below. The smell came first, not smoke and not char. Something like iron and wet ashes and the heart of an orange peel cut and warmed. A thing uncoiled itself from the sand as if pleased with its own trick. It was not large, not like the skulls in the Red Keep, not even like a good-sized horse. A hound might have looked it eye to eye if the hound were brave enough to look. Its hide was a tumble of little scales the color of rust turned toward blood, darker where ridges made their map. A dark mane of harder plates ran from the top of its skull down its spine like a serrated riverbed. Its head was too big for beauty and exactly right for power. Its eyes were gold that had remembered something else first. It put one foreclaw down and the sand beneath its foot seethed. It breathed out and the air seemed to have heavier things in it for a moment. Things that wanted to fall and then did not. It turned its head and looked at Oberyn as if it had chosen that order out of all possible orders and approved. Oberyn's spear was in her hand and then, after a very small separate pause, it was back against the ground. Illyria's breath was steady because she made it steady the way a woman made bread. The dragon, no, the creature, the fact, pushed its muzzle further out. A thin gleam of inner light crawled along the edges of its mouth like a secret turning on itself. It put its foreclaws down and came forward until the sun painted one side of its face the color of a pomegranate's inside and the other side shadowed so dark that its own shape surprised it. The first thing Oberyn did was nothing. He let himself be seen. The second thing he did was lower his body. The third thing was to reach for the bag of meat he had had Oberyn snarl at him for carrying. He had taken a goat quarter from the Vaith men and wrapped it in cloth and oiled the cloth so the smell would not cry to the whole desert. He unwrapped it slowly now as a man opens a letter he thinks he might love. He held the meat out on his palm. He did not throw it. He did not hold it too high. His hand shook a little because his hand was a human hand and not a lesson, and he let it shake because the creature would know if he lied with his body. The dragon looked at him and the meat and then at Illyria and then back at him. Its eyes were a cat's eyes enlarged by a child's drawing. It did not blink the way lizards did, or perhaps it did. Everything it did had the property of seeming correct before anyone had a chance to argue. It made a noise then that was not a growl. It was the low, short exhalation a smith makes when he judges the iron not yet ready. Came forward like a thought. It stepped into the bowl where the glass had formed. The thin crust crackled under its foot as if a dozen dragonflies had died there and left their wings. It stopped an arm's length from Oberyn. He felt the heat come off it like a man into a small, overheated room in winter and take a breath. He did not pull his hand back. The dragon considered the meat, considered the palm. It opened its mouth and the smell of stone and orange and iron flushed across his wrist. It took the meat in a quick, precise bite, careful not to touch him. It chewed in a sidewise way as if it were not certain yet where the business of teeth should be conducted. It swallowed. Then it breathed. A small bloom of fire, hardly more than a man's breath made visible, unfurled across the sand and went out, leaving a black kiss on the pail. The three of them did not move, and the Vaith men, watching from a distance they thought safe, did, shifting as if heat had touched the inside of their thighs. Oberyn's hand trembled once more after the dragon swallowed. He let it. He unwrapped the rest of the goat's leg and laid it on the sand between them and then lifted his hand away. He kept his body low. He made his breath slow and counted them until he did not have to pretend. The dragon ate. When it was done, It nuzzled the sand where the meat had been as if a memory might be edible. It raised its head and looked at him again, and a sound came out of its chest. Not exactly a purr and not a rattle, something like a stone rolling in a well. The sound made the little hairs in his ear lie down. It stepped forward one step and touched the tip of its muzzle to his wrist. The heat there was not screaming. It was insistent and steady. He had known the touch of spears and ropes and bed cords. This was like those in that it was a truth you could only learn by that touch. "Hello," he said quietly. He did not believe in gods because gods required too much believed without taste. But he had always believed in voices, and he knew how to find the one that did not ask the listener to do any work. "You came a long way to say that." The dragon's nostrils flared. It cocked its head like a bird, and there was a bird's quickness to its attention. It tapped one claw against a patch of glass, and the sound was pretty and bad both. It made the same sound again, as if practicing. At last it opened its mouth, and a thread of smoke came out and drew low loops in the air that the wind tore into idle pieces. Oberyn could feel Illyria's smile reach his skin. Behind him, Obara's breath came out through her nose in an astonished oath she would not repeat later because she would not like to remember that she had ever been anyone but fearless. "We will call you something," Oberyn said to the dragon. "We will call you by something you will not mind having shouted at you in a storm. We will not choose a name that would require a man to roll his eyes at a party." He glanced back and saw Illyria's mouth pursing with suppressed laughter at that. "But not today." The dragon moved gracelessly, and then, for a second, with a grace that would have made dancers throw away their shoes, it set its foreclaws closer to him. He did not back away. He put his hand out again, palm empty. The dragon blew on his hand, a breath that was not a joke. He forced himself not to snatch it away. Then he did something that afterward he would not be ready to justify. He raised his left forearm and let the inside of his wrist meet the dragon's lip. It had a border of softer skin there between scale and plate. He pressed his flesh, which had bled for so many smaller reasons, to that warm, living border. The dragon tasted him with a quick, hot flick. It left no mark but a small pinkness that would become a soreness. "We are agreed," he said. The words came of themselves. Ario would later say he had been speaking to himself. Illyria would later say she had heard a second voice under his, as if the desert had answered. Obara would swear she had heard nothing but a man who had decided something. They stayed until the sun's first red thought appeared at the horizon and the day began to confess its fatigue. The dragon made a den of sorts under the rock. It turned in it once, twice, the way a dog did and the way a man did on a mattress that was not his. Then it stilled. His breath went in and out. For a time it matched Oberyn's. Then it did not. They made their camp a little distance away because the heat from the dragon made the air drunk. The Vaith captain posted men at what he thought was a safe line, and then moved them twice in as many hours when their horses fidgeted and chewed their bits. Illyria made a meal of couscous and figs and salted beef, and Obara ate as if she were taking back the strength she had lent out to the day in unwise quantities. "Will you tell him?" Illyria asked later, head against Oberyn's shoulder as they watched the shadow under the rock breathe. "I told him," Oberyn said. "Dorne," Illyria said. "Yes," he said. He watched a bat flicker by like a torn piece of night. "I will tell him what a man tells his brother when something important and impossible has happened. I will tell him the truth and then lie about the parts that would make him afraid. That is what we do for each other. He has always been better at it than I am." "You will have to do better," Illyria said. "You have always preferred to drop truth like a jar of olives and let it shatter where it will. Men cut their feet and bleed, and you laugh and wash the cuts and tell them to be more careful with their jars. I have always had beautiful olives," he said, and she pinched him, to remind him he was not allowed that kind of evasion, not with her. "What will you call it?" Obara asked from where she lay on her back, looking up into darkness as if the stars owed her an answer. "We cannot ride into a town and say make space for the creature and have the butcher bring lamb. A name is a leash," Illyria said. "You do not put a leash on a thing until it knows where the nail is in the wall." Oberyn put his hand out into the air and turned it, feeling the heat lie in a band an inch above his palm. "There is a wind," he said, "that comes from the east in late summer, when the sand has stored enough anger to cross the sea and wash another land in it. It fills the lungs and dries them. It makes men say stupid things that they meant to hold back until winter, and then they must live in the house with those words. When it comes, our shutters talk. We name it and shrug and blame it for our mistakes." "Sirocco," Ilaria said, the word a coil. "It sounds like silk. It sounds like teeth. It sounds as if it will leave you thirsty," Oberyn said, practical. "Call it that and watch the sing-song maids of Sunspear make a song. Then you will have to feed it a goat every time a man asks if he may court a girl." "We will call it nothing until it agrees," Oberyn said. But the word he had spoken had nested under his tongue. Names had a way of making themselves inevitable. Before dawn, he woke from a brief, forgetful sleep to a sound that was not the sound of night creatures and not the sound of men pretending not to be afraid. He rose and went barefoot over the sand without waking Ilaria, who kept one hand on his leg for half a second and then allowed it to fall away to the blanket. The dragon lay with its head stretched out on the sand, the posture of a beast that had given up on pretense. Its eyes were open and aware, and it made the sound again, a low rolling rumble like a kettle just before it sings. Oberyn knelt. The day had not yet been born. The sky was the color of a bruise fading. He put his hand near the dragon's ear, which was only a small slit, a clever crease between scales where the world was allowed to go in and out. He did not pet it. He let heat pass between them. "Are you hungry?" he said, and felt foolish a little, and then, because there was no one to scold him for foolishness, felt not at all foolish. He made his breath slow again and let his heart copy it gradually. The dragon breathed out and his face received that strange orange stone scent. He went to the tethered goats they had taken from a fearful man at the last hamlet and cut one cleanly behind the ear with a blade so sharp the animal did not know it had been insulted by death until it had already laid down its argument. He carried the body. The dragon watched. When he had laid the goat down, he stepped back and waited. The dragon ate with less awkwardness now, and when it was finished, it licked the sand as before and then, as if remembering his hand, plated its muzzle against his forearm again with a quicker certainty. "Then we are agreed," he said again. At sunrise he sent Oberyn and the Vaith men for more water and for a runner to go to Sunspear with a message for Dorne that was truthful in all the ways that would not make a weak man faint. He wrote carefully. Sand heated enough to change its thinking. Boy burned in a way that was orderly rather than chaotic. Something under the rock, a scale, a breath, a creature. He did not write the word dragon. He did not write the word mine. He signed it with the name Dorne had called him when they were boys. Oberyn. He did not know why until the messenger had gone, and then he knew. There were some doors that opened only when the right boy knocked. He stayed because he could not have left if the prince had come himself to haul him home. And he stayed because leaving would have been the sort of self-restraint another man might call prudence, and Oberyn had never been punished by prudence in a way that taught him to prize it. That afternoon Lady Nemella of Ghost Hill came with less than a dozen men, but with twice that number of stories. She wore a mantle the color of apricot wine and a ring with a sea dragon carved in shell. She looked at the black rocks, at the glass bowl, at the dragon's den with an interest that was honest and voracious at once. "They told me," she said to Oberyn, "that you held a piece of night in your hands and that it did not turn your hair white. I came to see if the hair was a lie." She tilted her head. "Some of us are becoming old men, Oberyn. You are becoming a legend in tea. The laziest way. It will not suit you. Perhaps I am becoming tired," he said. "Perhaps I want to grow weak with a thing no one can deny me." She narrowed her eyes. "You have always loved that which is dangerous exactly because it is dangerous. This is different. This breathes for itself. Many of my lovers have done the same," he said. "And yet I lived." Nemella looked past him then, and the color left her mouth for one of those small measurable moments that told you a thing was true. The dragon had come out with the lazy dignity of an animal that refuses to hurry because others are watching. It set its 4 feet on the edge of the glass bowl, and the glass made its pretty bad music again. "Ah," Nemella said faintly. "You brought a wooden one?" She smiled because her mouth had made a promise to itself when she was 14 to always smile at danger first and cry after. "Would you like to put your hand out?" Oberyn asked, perfectly courteous. Nimella's laugh broke into two pieces and ran away. "I would like to not have all my jewels melted to my fingers," she said briskly. "I will watch from here and show my courage in my later telling." Ellaria smiled at that, and in the corner of his eye Oberyn saw Obara roll her eyes. The Vaith men had adopted the carefully bored attitudes of soldiers who were having their lives changed and resented it. When the dragon had eaten again and slept again and the first dark lifted its head out of the sand, Oberyn stood and put his hand against its jaw. "We are going to be very impolite," he said. "We are going to leave this polite place where the sand covers our tracks and go where men will point and shout and make songs that are dull. You will not eat any of those men unless I tell you to, and if I tell you to, you will do it cleanly. Do not break bones with your teeth. That is vulgar." He knew it for madness to speak to a beast as if its ear were a court, but his voice kept his mind from running out past the little fence that kept it from thinking of certain heads from certain great houses set on certain pikes. He turned to Ellaria, who was looking at him like a woman who had taken a bite of something and had not decided yet whether it was too spicy to enjoy. "We will show them the edge of something," he said. "Not to threaten, to teach." "You do not teach a king anything he does not want to learn," she said. "You make him think he has had the thought and you leave before he realizes you were there." "I am tired of cleverness," he said, and meant it. "Cleverness makes a man proud of how small he has made his victory. I want something big and honest for once, something that does not require me to lie to a mirror." "You will take a saddle," Obara said practically, "and a rope, and you will drag your pride through the air on a leash like a child's toy. There are books. I have seen them. Targaryens made neck muzzles. You will not fall and make your head into a splash in the sand because you will have promised me you will not." "There is iron at Sunspear," Ellaria said. "There are men who build cages and chains and stirrups and tales about how those things save us." He bent and touched his forehead to hers. "Come with me," he said. "If the beast throws me, you will laugh and make it clean to die." "I will scold the beast for rudeness," she said and smiled without joy. "I will not make it clean to die. I am not Dorne." He sent new messages. He sent for leatherworkers and a smith he had once kept from jail by adding a coin where a missing tooth had made a whistle in a magistrate's ear. He sent for a woman in the water gardens who had been a rope dancer in her first life. He did it all as if the doing of it were the ordinary work of a week. He did not say aloud the thing that filled his chest and made even his laughter taste new. That something had changed in the world without his permission, and for once it was something he would have asked for if anyone had ever offered him choices in this size. For 3 days he fed the dragon meat and then coals and then meat warmed on coals until it reached for the heat before it reached for the fat. He taught it as if it could learn. He walked beside it and made it walk beside him. He held a rope and taught it that rope was not a snake the way boys had to be taught a whip was not always a story about their fathers. He sang to it once, one of those ugly little songs from the street in Norvos that Malario had pretended to despise at first and later had asked for in a voice so quiet it had been his favorite way to sing it. The dragon set its head sideways and made that sound as if a stone rolled in a barrel. And on the 4th day, under a sky that had silver lines in it like cracks in a pot that had been mended well, Oberyn set the first leather against scale and the dragon did not remove it with its teeth. Ellaria held the cinch strap and Obara slid her palm against a buckle to test for pinch. The leather had a smell that was itself. A smell like a saddle, the smell like a promise to a horse and to a man both, and the dragon breathed it in and breathed it out as if to ask what this joke was. It suffered the belly strap like a woman suffers a too tight lace at her niece's name day. Oberyn put his foot where Obara told him to put it, not in a stirrup yet because they had not earned that bit of complication. He put his hand where Ellaria told him to put it, because she was the only god he would obey. He lifted and the dragon lifted too, and for a moment the world tried to make 2 men of him, one on the ground and one in the air. He chose the one in the air. He sat badly. The dragon did not like it. The dragon pouted its shoulder and made the air warp with its dissatisfaction. His knee ground into scale and his ribs found parts of themselves he had not known were there. He made his body still the way he had made his voice quiet for orphans and lovers. He let the wrongness pass through him and be replaced by the convenience of the only possible rightness. He was on the back of a thing that had more claim to the history of the world than any of the men who thought they ruled it. They did not fly that day. He did not ask it. They walked, if anything that moved like that could be said to walk, and the sand learned a new language under their combined weight. The Vaith men watched and made bet after bet and won and lost them and forgot to collect. At dusk, with the saddle loosened and the dragon sleeping and the leather smelling of something that wasn't fear anymore, Oberyn lay on his back on their blanket and looked at a sky with half its coin spent. Ilaria rested against his side and Obara cleaned her nails with the point of her spear, and the world did not care what little things men did under its face. "You will do it," Ilaria said to the sky. "The big mad thing that will make Dorne look at the sea until his eyes are dry." "I have been doing small mad things for years," Oberyn said. "They have not satisfied me." "Why attack a mountain with a hammer?" Obara said. "When you can bring the sun down to bite it." He did not say the name of any mountain. He did not have to. The bowl inside his chest was full now. Not of sand but of heat that would not even bother to wear a shape until it chose to. He closed his eyes and saw a city with red roofs and too many faces he knew accidentally. And he saw a woman's hand on a baby's foot and two tiny toes that had never done anything wrong and never would. He saw men he had spoken to as if they were better than their sins and had gone away and laughed. He saw himself, and that was the useful part. He saw the boy who had run barefoot along the upper walks of the water gardens with a stick for a spear and had sworn he would never learn to sit out pain the way his brother did, and he forgave him nothing, and he loved him anyway. He slept then, and he dreamed for the first time in many months a dream that did not hurt. In it he stood on the long curve of a beach near Ghost Hill, and the wind pushed his hair back and salt stung his lips and a shadow went over him, and it was not a cloud and he did not duck. He woke at dawn and a shadow went over him, and it was not a cloud and he was already standing. The dragon rose into the morning air with the graceless flailing of a fledgling throne before it was entirely certain about the mechanics of height. It ran 2 steps, 3, its wings beat the air into submission and then found purchase. The sand under the wind flew up and the Vaith men cursed and someone laughed and Obara held her spear at a stupid angle and did not care. It rose and it was not beautiful yet, but it would be. Oberyn was not on its back. He watched it and measured the distance between what it was and what it could do to a war and to a city and to a family name. The distance was not as great as a man who loved peace would pray. When it landed, half in a stumble, the legs that had never done this work before braced and corrected and found geometry without a teacher. It shook itself as a dog shakes water. It sneezed fire by accident and set a small bush into a brief brilliant afterlife. It turned its head to him and the eye that would, in songs sung by girls in yellow skirts years from now, be compared to the sun through a piece of amber looked straight into him as if the world were a glass and it could choose what to drink. He walked forward and placed his hand to its lip. It breathed out once and the breath was cool enough that his skin could believe in morning again. He said a name, and whether he had chosen it or whether it had waited on his tongue, since a wind had once rattled the shutters of a house where he had broken his first law did not matter. "Sirocco," he said. "Come then." The dragon's head lifted. It made that stone-rolling sound again, louder now. It spread its wings without committing to anything and then closed them again like a trick it liked. It took 1 step forward so that his hand slid across the scales at the edge of its jaw, and he felt there the place where soft and hard met, and he felt something in himself answer, as if a door had opened onto a room he had owned for years without knowing anyone had built it. He did not look at Ilaria or Obara or the Vaith men or the horizon. He did not look past the moment. "Come," he said again. "We have work that the world has owed me a long time, and you will help me collect." The wind lifted a little, from the east, dry and charged and insolent, tasted like a promise broken and not regretted. He breathed it, and the dragon breathed it, and the day let itself be turned. The first time he climbed into the saddle and Sirocco accepted his weight as something other than a mistake. The morning had that bleached, emptied-out quality of days after too much wind, when the edges of things felt thin. The leather creaked in a patient way, The buckles complained. The rope dancer Kella, the woman from the gardens Ilaria had sent for, whose wrists had the old rope burns like bracelets and whose knees cracked when she bent because even clouds crack eventually, stood at Sirocco's left shoulder with a coil of hemp and said, without any of the respect a prince was usually fed, "It is not the dragon that will throw you, my prince. You will throw yourself. Your belly thinks it knows what falling is. Teach your belly the wrong of it." Oberyn nodded because he wanted to honor anyone who called him on his vanity and continued anyway. He kept his weight over his knees as Kella had shouted at him to do on the practice beam, while he walked in silly slow circles with a pitcher of water balanced on his head like a girl in a market street. He let the strap across his thighs bite and made peace with the bite. He thought of how a man's first hour on a saddle was always the hour that decided whether he would be a man who lied about horses or not. He would not be a liar today. Sirocco shifted. From 4 foot to 4 foot, an old sailor feeling the tide under a keel, he still did not entirely trust. The dragon's wings, folded, made a valley the width of a road. The ridge plates along his neck clicked faintly when he breathed, like beads tapping a clay pot. His eye rolled, gold and slit, and then settled on Kella, who glared right back at him and clicked her tongue. "See," Ilaria said lightly from the side of the hollow where their camp had grown into a habit of tents and ropes and a kitchen fly made from 2 old banners. "He has found a mistress strict enough to suit him." Ariohota stood with his arms folded and his axe butt on the ground and the head canted away as if to keep its temper. He said nothing. Ario's silences were a species of weather. You learned to carry an extra cloak if you lived under them long enough. "You will not lean into the air like a fool in love with wind," Kella said, walking her calloused hand along the rein that wasn't. They had not found a way to give Sirocco reins without making him a horse an insult, so they had fashioned a strap that crossed under the jaw, a weight and pressure more than a bridle. "You will lean into the animal as if a lover were carrying you. Let your hips be smarter than your shoulders, or your shoulders will teach your head what sand tastes like." "Sand tastes like everything else in Dorne," Oberyn said, and let his hips answer. The strap across Sirocco's chest moved with the breath and he made himself ride the breath. Match it, be within it. Sirocco snorted softly, an exhale that made a wedge of hot air, and Oberyn felt that breath through his boot soles, through the joint of the stirrup that was not a stirrup but an idea. He lifted his hand. Obara, who had been waiting for just that sign with the restless wolfish grin of a soldier too long kept safe, jerked the rope from the dragon's hind strap. Kella tossed her coil aside. The tether fell slack. "Climb and balance, you great lizard," Oberyn said under his breath. "Let us find out if I am to be remembered as a man who died of ambition or of stupidity." Sirocco gathered himself, a collection of intention drawing up under plates and muscle, and then he did not leap. He moved into a run with a surprising civility, feet light, head level, not that clumsy flailing of the first day. The world tilted around them without quite changing its mind. The wings lifted a handspan from his body, then a handspan more, then opened in a way that made Ilaria's mouth part the way a woman's mouth parts at a very good song. There was a beat then that met the morning like an argument. Sand leapt up to agree. Oberyn's belly remembered falling and then, like a student who had been convinced by a better teacher, accepted the correction. He leaned where Kella had told him to lean. The saddle squealed once as if offended by the difference between horse and this. He put his hand against the base of Sirocco's neck and felt the living lever there. They rose not high, not even as high as the top of a watchtower, but enough that a man could feel the world hunch under him instead of meeting his foot. The air changed temperature like a woman lifting a linen out of the wash and holding it to the wind. Oberyn's eyes watered. He swallowed a laugh, and it came out as something that would have embarrassed him in any other company. "Keep low," Kella shouted up, small and precise in the roar of the thing's wings. "Let your spine be a rope, not a stick." "Rope," Oberyn said. He put his cheek to the hard base of the neck where the ridge plates began. He could feel, with an intimacy that had nothing to do with lust and everything to do with the completeness that lust lies about, the beat of Sirocco's enormous heart. It was like riding a forge when the coals were at their cleanest heat. They skimmed the dune line and the low black outcrops. The dragon's shadow ran along the sand beside them, a darker shape with edges breaking on every ripple. Two shepherds on a distant rise dropped into a crouch as if a god's gaze had pressed them down. One of the Vaith men cried out and then punched his own mouth, ashamed of his noise. Obara's hair came unwound from its first braid and flung itself behind her like a banner. "Down now," Oberyn said softly, because he had promised Ilaria he would not ask for too much too soon. He put his weight forward and then back the way Kella had taught him, signals like a dance called with hips and knee. Sirocco resisted the way anything resists becoming a habit, and then complied because compliance saved him from the unpleasantness of confusion. They sank, the wings set at an angle that made the air remember why things normally fell. They touched the sand with a hop-skip like a gull. Oberyn let the saddle take his weight in his thighs and knees, and his spine remembered the rope again. The dragon shook himself hard enough that Oberyn's teeth clicked. Kella swore softly and approvingly. "Once around," Obara yelled. "Again, again." "Once only," Ilaria called, smiling despite herself. "We don't boil a pot dry the first time we put it on the fire." They made the circle. They came down with less argument from air and bone. Oberyn slid to the ground with a careful humility that would have made his past self snort. He stood there and let his legs rhyme with the ground again while the dragon blew on his shoulder with a long breath and pressed his lip briefly to the strap as if to say this, too, was a thing it now thought with. "You will have a scar where the buckle rubs," Ilaria said, looking at the inside of his knee. "I will enjoy telling anyone who asks how you got it. I will make up a story that insults some lord," he said. "You may improve it." Kella spat neatly into the sand and nodded. "You can be taught. Men with pretty names are not always good students. You are." "I am vain," Oberyn said. "Vanity doesn't like falling." He stroked the warm plate at the dragon's jaw guy. And that meeting place of hard and soft that had become how he told himself this was real. "We'll try height when we have to, not before." "Before," Obara said. "Before someone else decides we have to." He looked toward the horizon where the line of heat always rose like a rumor and said nothing out loud about who that someone else would be. When the messenger Dorne sent came rattling into the camp under a slat of shade that did not belong to the landscape. He came with 2 camel trains and a litter under light canvas and a crooked man with a bad scalp scar who was introduced as the master of leathers at Sunspear. The camel's breath smelled like old stories. With them came 6 swordsmen who wore the sun and spear on their breast in thread, which told any man who watched that Dorne had decided to be seen being cautious. Ario spoke softly to their captain. The man's eyes moved to the dragon and then moved away without the usual third motion that made men heroes or corpses. Obara brought the crooked leathermaster to Sirocco the way a proud child brings a friend to see a secret in a jar. He was not cowed. He had a stubborn craftsman's arched backness that made the mouth thin and the eyes unafraid. He set his hand against the scale and felt its heat and then the change where the plate gave, and grunted as if a puzzle had fallen into place. "If I make a girth that bites that place," he said to no one and to everyone, tapping the small gap, "you will not thank me. If I leave 3 fingers there, my grandchildren will eat well. If I make the breastplate so that the weight can shift forward and back, the leather will live half a year longer. The buckles will not." "You will be paid enough to forgive the buckles," Oberyn said. "A prince says that as if my hands are coins," the leathermaster said, absent of apology. "Forgive me if I say it back. Your hands are not coins. They are meat. What lives between the meat and the leather is skill. Pay that." Ilaria smiled, liking him at once. "What are you called?" "Fargo," he said. "My mother thought she was funny." He shrugged, his scar wrinkling like a frown. "She wasn't." Kella and Fargo set to work as if they had practiced together for a year, Kella making him feel the way Sirocco's breathing changed the fit, Fargo showing her where a reinforced hole would hold without tearing under torque. Beside them, Badal the shepherd boy, whom Oberyn had not sent away and for whom he had, with his gardener's hands turned briefly to a better use, found work carrying water, fetching charcoal, holding a rope lightly when an extra arm was needed, watched with a grave intensity that made him older by an hour. He had begun to be satisfied with his silence. That was good in a place where noise could startle air itself. When Doran's reply arrived with the second runner, no horses for messages. Areo had learned the pattern of spies and their listening posts far better than he had learned the patterns of tides. The scroll smelled of the cedar oil used to keep moths off the prince's cloaks. Oberyn broke the seal where the sun had been pressed into wax and read, standing in the shade by the water jugs while Ilaria watched his face for the small tells. He could not school in front of her. "Brother," it said, and the tight script Doran wore like an old ring made even the word look patient and slightly pained. "I have received your news. I have heard it from Caliot's mouth as well, since he cannot be kept from the chamber these days, and he insists upon telling me whether or not he has been invited. I confess to you that my first impulse was to find a heavier chair to sit in. My second was to write to you to burn it. I have made neither choice. I ask you to remember that a thing which breathes and burns may be courted but will not be married. You will not own it unless it chooses to be owned. Therefore you will not pretend elsewhere that you own it. Speak softly to those who will want to hear a boast. You ask nothing, but I answer anyway. I will not forbid you from bringing it to Sunspear. I will require you to do it at night. I will require you to let Areo tell my guards what they are seeing before they turn and run, and tell my enemies anything at all. I will require you to take food away from my table to feed this creature, and I will require you to share any letters you receive from those who will say that they have always been our friends and wish to have their old friendship acknowledged presently. I remember, brother, that you believe in fair fights if they are between boys and women in bed and not when they are in the world. I will ask you to remember something too. When Nymeria came ashore, she burned her ships. It was not bravery alone. It was removing an option so that no one else could make her use it. Think what ships you are building with your hands now. Think whether you will be able to burn them later or whether they will own you. Send word about the boy. I do not like not knowing the names of those who will one day claim me in their stories. Your brother, Doran." Oberyn rolled the letter again slowly and tapped its end in his hand. Then he held it out to Ilaria without comment, and she read it and made that small movement with her mouth when she tasted something sharp but not unpleasant. "He is afraid," she said, simple. "He is brave enough to say so to me," Oberyn said. "He tells you about ships because he hopes you remember that he did not burn his," Ilaria said. "He kept them all in his head. He still has them. He sets them out every morning, one by one, and sails each to the end of the horizon and then brings them back in the night and sets them in their little places. You think you are not like him because you like to set things on fire. You both keep ships. You both count the oars. The difference," Oberyn said, "is that I will sail one." She folded the letter and tucked it back into the plain wooden case the runner had brought. "You will set out," she said, "and you will not allow that there are currents stronger than your cleverness. I will be in the prow. I will tell you when you are pretending to be the wind." It took 2 more days of rope and hide and training the dragon that the slap of a palm on leather meant bend and the pressure of a knee meant climb. Kella taught an old dancer's trick, breath on command. "You cannot make another body breathe with you," she said, tying a cord around Oberyn's waist and yanking it in time. "You can convince it. That is different. Think of it as an insult if you like. I think of everything as an insult first and then decide later if it is a joke." On the 3rd afternoon, a cloud built over the broken teeth of the Red Mountains and dragged a gray cuff down their jaw. The line of rain under it was like a city marching. The first drops at the camp were fat and presumptuous, and the smell of lightning ran a finger along the hair of every arm. The Vaith men cursed the sky as if it were a rival that had come uninvited, and then, when the rain began in earnest, laughed like boys who had found a secret. The desert had its own noise in such weather, its own applause. Sirocco hated the rain the way a cat hates a bath. He shook it from his wings and stepped back from the way it turned dust into something that clung to his toes. When the first lightning walked across the cloud like a white animal trying to find a comfortable place to sleep, Sirocco made a sound from deep in his body that was not fear. It was a challenge. "Do not teach the sky," Kella said dryly, "unless you mean to learn from it too." They sheltered under the black overhang, which steamed faintly with the sudden moisture. Ilaria's laughter grew low and private, and she ducked her head and let the rain run over her hair. Badal stood with his arms out, still awkward in his growing limbs, and tasted the drops like a man who might not be allowed them again. When the rain passed, it left behind a clean feeling as if hands had been washed in the air. The dragon stepped out from cover, lifted his head, and opened his mouth in a very nearly silent roar, the throat rolling, the tongue a brief bright thing, the breath a heat that dried a handbreadth of sand in front of him to a pale white patch. "Little oven," Ilaria said. "Feed him bread. Meat will make him want blood. Bread will make him a farmer," Obara said, and her scorn at the idea was playful. "We are all farmers," Oberyn said. "We plant, we wait, we reap. Sometimes the crop is skulls. Sometimes it is figs." That night, he lay with Ilaria under canvas while the wind, having gorged itself on rain, roamed the camp with fat, lazy gusts. He pressed his face into the hollow of her shoulder where skin kept the heat of the day as a secret and listened to her breath until his had followed it the way it always did. He kept his hands busy with the simple work of drawing idle lines on her back as if mapping something that could be walked. There were conversations that could only be had with a fingertip. "When we fly to Sunspear," she said at last, drowsy, "what will you say to the children? They will ask. They ask about anything with eyes." "I will say that this is an animal we must treat kindly," he said. "I will say it is no different than a good horse, except it is uglier and eats more." "They will not believe you," she murmured. "They have a better nose for truth than our lords do. Then I will tell them what I tell my daughters when they ask a question they have no business breaking their heads on. That there are two truths in a room, and both are beautiful, and if you must choose one, you should choose the one that leaves fewer bones broken." She turned to face him, her body slipping around his with the old rightness that sometimes made him foolish enough to think the world could be righted. "You are going to take a beast that breathes fire and turn it into philosophy," she whispered. "Only you would make that seem charming." He pressed his mouth to her wrist where her pulse lived. "I will turn it into justice," he said, and the word lodged between them like a stone you cannot help but put your hand on when you pass. They left for Sunspear in the kind of dark that is not a blackness but a layering of blacks, a seam opening under stars. They had made a plan because Dorne had insisted on it in a last letter that smelled less of cedar and more of sleeplessness. Ario went ahead with 2 riders to scatter anyone who might be on the dunes out of habit. Obara rode with the Vaith men for the joy of being fast in the night. Ilaria sat astride a lean mare with a mind of her own, and did not look up at the dragon's shadow when it came along beside them because looking up would make the breath stick in her throat, and she was proud.
Oberyn rode Sirocco.
He did not take the height the way a thief takes a purse. He asked for it. They lifted together hard, and then the night accepted them as if they belonged to it. Sunspear by day was a geometry of pale stone and shadow and its own kind of heat. By night it was a shape you felt with your memory more than your eyes. The sea sent up its old proof that it was constant. Sound, smell, a breath. The water gardens lay like a promise on the black. He thought for a second of the first time he had ridden through those green courtyards, and that thought made him almost poor enough to turn back, but not quite. They came down on an empty stretch of beach where Dorne had posted torches at intervals like polite teeth. Ario stood by the largest torch with his axe turned inward, and the black and the red of the great doors of the Tower of the Sun were not far. Dorne himself had come down a level of stairs he ought not have taken with his foot, and sat in a chair that had been brought with more ceremony than he would have liked. Caliot hovered like an eager moth near a lamp. When Sirocco landed, the sound ran up the doors and into the stone, a vibration rather than a noise. The dragon set his 4 feet on sand that had seen kingship and did not care. The men in sun and spear livery who ringed the torches did not break, did not run. Ario's weather had prepared them. 1 or 2 sobbed once, helpless and honest, and then swallowed their own noise as if the night might be offended. Dorne sat very straight, using his hands on the chair arms as if they could keep him from being moved without his consent. Oberyn slid down and walked forward with his hands empty. He looked like a man introducing a guest who was too big for the door. He kept his mouth soft, because he knew his own face was a weapon and he had learned when not to brandish it. "Brother," he said. Dorne's eyes were not large. The line of pain that had been traveling across his face these last years without stopping had taught his gaze to go narrow by habit. Tonight that habit broke. His eyes widened. It was a small, honest lucidity. "Oberyn," he said, and a dozen things dried up in Oberyn that he had not realized were still damp enough to rot. Sirocco lowered his head slightly at the sound. He made the stone rolling sound. The torches leaned as if flattered. "This is Sirocco," Oberyn said. He had not planned to announce that. The name had simply decided it wanted to be heard by the man who had taught him that words can be measures. "He will not eat any of the children. He prefers goats." Caliot made a strangled sound that was a laugh who had lost its confidence and then found it again. "Goats," he said, as if he had been kept out of a charming conspiracy. Doran's mouth shaped something that might have been a smile if it had not been too tired to finish the gesture. "I asked you to come at night," he said. "I know how to obey when it amuses me," Oberyn said. Doran's eyes went from him to the dragon as if accepting that there are new ways for the world to end. He took a long breath and let it out slowly. "I am not a fool," he said. "I want to reach for this. I will not. I will sit instead and sing to it as if it were a dangerous baby. That is what being a prince is." "Sing softly," Ilaria said, coming forward into the torchlight with her hair braided and eyes alight. "He is vain. He likes to think he is being sung to for his beauty." "I will sing about his goats," Doran said. He looked very briefly, as if a small sharp joke had once lived inside him and had turned over in its sleep. He extended a hand. Oberyn bent and kissed his fingers the way he had as a boy, quickly, rebellious even then, but not so rebellious he would refuse that old language. "It is not a thing," Doran said after a minute, his voice lower. "It is not one of your pretty toys that break and then you laugh. It will break us if it breaks wrong." "Then it will not break wrong," Oberyn said, and knew, even in the saying, that this was not how the world behaved. He said it anyway. They kept the dragon on the sand the first night because the smell of salt seemed to swell his interest. The surf hissed and the torchlight made the tips of waves look like small animals running, then dying, then running again. People from the lower town came as if they had shared a dream, barefoot, silent, in a scatter that did not look like a crowd until you counted 100 and then more. Ario, with a lift of his chin, moved his men and the scattering formed a respectful distance without being told. Doran let them come. He sat and was seen and did not smile, and the seeing made their tongues slow. A woman with a baby wrapped so tight the child looked like a loaf held the infant up for a moment and then lowered it again with a visible shake as if asking the knight's pardon. Oberyn fed Sirocco 2 goats and a kettle of coals, and the dragon's breath lit the coal as a man's breath lights a tinder twig. No spitting, no waste. The fire glowed on the scales like a red thought. Badel stood 3 paces off because the boy had learned his own perimeter, and this was why Oberyn had not sent him away. The boy's hands were fists at his sides. He would tell the story later in a loud voice, and he would say that he had not been afraid. Oberyn would not contradict him. They brought Sirocco inland to a salt-gnawed tower that had been used once to watch for sails, and would never be used for that again because once a dragon slept in a place, its future altered. That first night, Doran ordered no bells rung. "We will surrender some part of our advantage to courtesy," he said, and Oberyn nodded as if the sentence were a proverb and not his brother's invention. In the quiet that followed, the lower town hummed to itself in its own tongue. At dawn, they brought him to the water gardens. Oberyn would have said the risk was unnecessary if anyone else had proposed it. Because he wished it, he found it the proper play, and he knew enough about his own character to be suspicious of himself. Doran did not forbid him. He only said, "We will do it carefully. We will hold our breath in our mouths and not let it out until we are done. And if a child screams, we will leave and not come back until I can walk a little faster." They went in by the jasmine-laced gate. The air there had always been the only cool truth Dorne would allow anyone. Even the dragon lowered his head slightly, as if paying a temple the courtesy of not towering over its icons. Children's voices carried high and fearless, and then broke, and then a silence fell that made Oberyn's heart stand still for one beat and then find the next. A little boy with hair like a wet date took one step forward, another, eyes huge, and then, with the confidence of a royal bastard who had been told his place in the world was right under his foot, put his small hand up to the dragon's lip the way he would have to a strange dog. Sirocco breathed. The child laughed, shockingly loud. A girl with a long scar down her face from where a jar had broken too near her when her mother was not watching hard in. Oof made the same small move with her palm held flat because she had fed horses and had been warned about teeth her whole life. The dragon breathed on her too. She nodded once gravely and then ran back to the pool and whooped like the sound a gull makes. "You see," Oberyn said to Dorne, "they teach us how to be brave. You were worried for nothing." "I am worried for everything," Dorne said, soft and flat. His fingers showed white where he rested them on the head of his stick. "It is my vocation." "We have different vocations," Oberyn said, and did not add what he thought. That a dragon had just drunk from the same air as the orphans of the Greenblood and had not burned any of them, and if there were gods they ought to come and hand him his payment now. Ilaria knelt by the shallow edge and scooped water onto her forearms. "He will want to swim," she said. "Everything clever wants to find out whether the thing that touches it can be held." Sirocco, paying more attention than a beast was supposed to be capable of, stepped into the pool 1 foot, then the other, and hissed faintly when water rose against his belly plates. He lifted his tail high out of reflex and set it down on tile with a slap. The fish scattered and then returned the way they always returned to anything that could be described as food. For a moment that was indecent and wonderful, Sirocco became ridiculous, hips in the water, 4 feet out, head tilted like a hen investigating a new kind of seed. The children clapped, honest and mean because laughter is mean in children's mouths, and this made Oberyn love them more. The dragon sneezed and a bubble of steam popped against Ilaria's shoulder. She laughed with them and dabbed the water away. The city needed 3 breaths to decide it would spend its day talking about anything else. The first breath was fear. The second was pride. The third was calculation. Merchants came by 2 and 3s to stand at a distance and talk without raising their voices. Sailors stood with their smell of tar and tobacco and looked upward as if sky itself now had rules they would have to learn. A man selling oranges on a cart on the corner of the outer square put a dragon on the parchment of his sign with a charcoal piece and then rubbed it out, ashamed of his opportunism because it had not felt clever. It had felt obvious. Letters ran on feet to the other houses whether Oberyn and Dorne wished it or not. Men carried this kind of news as if news were water and their bodies were buckets. By nightfall the Fowler Falcons had lifted from Skirich. The Toland riders were on the coast road, their false dragon already dressed in ribbons and painted eyes because Nemella had a gift for insisting on her jokes until they came true or else stopped being funny. The Eulers sent nothing, which was a message, and the Ironwoods sent too much, which was a different kind of message. A long-made thing full of courtesies that had powdered sugar on them and covered knives. Dorne called a council because he had been waiting to do so before Oberyn had been born. They sat in the cool long room with the pattern tile that had always made Oberyn think of a sky-learned arithmetic. Ario stood behind Doran's chair. Ilaria lay along a cushion with one knee up and a hand on her shin. She looked like a woman who would answer a question with an elegant insult. Caliot took notes for the pleasure of ordering other men's heat. Obara leaned against the cool stone of a pillar and made no noise. Nymeria Sand came at last, not quite late, with her dark eyes amused by men. Tyene came as a scent before she came as a face and kissed Doran's cheek until he smiled despite himself. "My brother has done something large," Dorne said without preamble. "I require that you all become larger to meet it." "Why should it be hard?" Enwem Sand said lazily. "To be large. Men do it every day with lies." Tyene lasted a heartbeat and then did not, because even her softness had a spine. "We must not let the Reach know before we choose who ought to know," she said. "They will say they have always loved us. The Tyrells always say that. They say it with flowers. They say it because they mean to put thorns in your hand while you are smelling their petals," Ilaria said, and some part of the room that preferred politics to any other occupation made a small happy noise under the words. "Send to the Reach," Dorne said, unperturbed. "Send to Old Town, where men who breed knowledge like rabbits will tell us whether there is anything written that will be of any use at all. We must know if there are bells to ring to make a dragon leave a city alone." He smiled very slightly. Send also to the Stormlands. The last time a dragon flew over the Stormlands, someone wrote a poem with enough rhyme in it to make a town drunk. Let them drink for us again. Send to Ironwood, Oberyn said. A silence like a small tight wire hung between the brothers for a moment. Areo moved his weight to the other foot, as if acknowledging that sometimes the way men said one another's names was as dangerous as the way men held knives. Send what? Dorne asked mildly. To Ironwood that will not be heard as a declaration? An invitation, Oberyn said. Let Martell and Ironwood stand together under the shadow of this new thing and say it is ours and not the world's. If he refuses, let it be said that he refuses peace in front of his own men. Martin Ironwood never refuses anything in front of his own men, Dorne said. He goes into another room and does it there. He returns and announces that he has accepted after all. He is Scotch. He is Patience's mirror. Do not play mirrors with him. We are not playing, Oberyn said. He could feel the old mischief that sang under his anger, something like a boy's whistle. He tamped it down with the heel of his thought. Invite him. If he declines, we can tell ourselves we were princes. And, Ilaria said evenly, send to Starfall. Lady Lyria Dane is not as simple as she looks. She will see a shape behind this shape, and if she is given no place to sit, she will make one. Send to Starfall, Dorne said. Send to Hellholt and to Kingsgrave. Send to the Fowlers and to the Tollans. Send to Saltshore and to Lemonwood and to Ghost Hill. And send to High Hermitage too, to that half-branch of a family that always pretends to be surprised when they are asked to come to dinner. When they have all sat in this room and become larger, as I have asked, we will cut the bread and see how much is left. Tyene folded her hands in the way that made men foolish. And King's Landing? She asked. Will you tell them we have adopted a kitten and its name is Sirocco? Ilaria laughed. We will tell them we have taken a lover and he is tall and handsome and they are not invited to the wedding. We will tell them, Dorne said slowly. Nothing, for now. It is an old habit of ours. Not telling them things. It has kept our heads where they belong. Oberyn stood and paced to the window because the room had begun to get small around him. The sea threw light up from outside and his face went strange in it, the way a face becomes a mask at a fire. I will not pretend, he said. I will not pretend this is anything but what it is. I am going to show them. Not yet. Soon. And to what purpose? Dorne asked softly. What leverage do you suppose to gain by flinging a fire at their eyes when they are half asleep? A vision flashed up so quickly that Oberyn had to shut his eyes against it. The Red Keep is seen from above, brittle red tiles that have never been soft under the hands of lovers, courtyards where men had laughed and lied to him, stones that had been washed with water until the smell would never leave, a great square banner with a lion on it that would take so long to burn because old things do not burn quickly. He breathed once and let the vision out of his body like smoke. Purpose, he said. They will think again about what it means to refuse a prince of Dorne justice. They will stand where I stood and think of height and heat and the way a breath can be enough. They will think of the mountain not as a man who holds a writ but as meat. Perhaps then their cleverness will push them to do the right thing for the wrong reason. I am not a priest. I do not care if a head is bowed for the sake of a god or for the sake of keeping the hair from burning. Little brother, Dorne said, and there was affection in it and the patience of broken glass. I have never been able to keep you from leaping. Leaping is why you have liked your life. I am tired of leaping. I want to walk carefully to the end of mine. Do not argue that I have any business choosing the length of your strides. I will not argue, Oberyn said. He turned and the red light made his gem of a grin an ugly thing. He let it be ugly because he was tired of smoothing everything. I will do this, Dorne said. Train him, feed him. Learn what he does when you surprise him and what he does when you are boring. Learn what frightens him. Learn what makes him so pleased that he lies down in a way that makes him forget his teeth. Do all this before you fly over a city where my daughter once slept. Ilaria had been listening with a tight face, too still even for her. She said then, very quiet, Send me to Ironwood. They looked at her. The air between them changed. The girls stopped their fidgets. Caliot dropped his pen and picked it up again with a hand that was suddenly very noticeable to his owner. "You hate that house?" Oberyn said reflexively. "I hate splinters," Ellaria said. "But I pull them out when they get into the meat of a finger. Ironwood is a splinter in the hand we will use to hold this thing. I am patient with pain, but I am not stupid." She turned to Dorne. Send someone who is neither Martell nor Hota nor any of our usual messengers. Send me because I do not offend men by breathing. Send me because I am not the woman who gave you daughters. I am the woman who chose you after. He will listen enough not to say no twice. Doran's head lifted a degree. He weighed her. He might have held a lemon in his hand that he did not plan to cut and yet tested for ripeness. "If I send you," he said, "I send you with my word. You will not embroider it." "I will not," she said. "Ario," Doran said without looking back. Hoda's voice was the scrape of a stone over sand. "I will go with her." "You will not," Ellaria said. "They will read your acts and not hear my mouth. And your back is needed here because my prince will find new ways to fall out of the sky." Ario looked at Oberyn because sometimes it was simpler to apply loyalty to the person who would put it to immediate use. Oberyn, whose respect for Ario's judgment had altered from a liking for his strength to a reliance on his thinking without his permission, nodded once. "Stay and teach me to land," he said. Ellaria went within 2 days with 2 women and 4 men whose faces were forgettable by plan. She wore a dress that made her look like wind. She smiled the smile that had disarmed at least 6 small wars in Oberyn's long life and had started at least 3 that delighted her. She left with a kiss for Sirocco's lip and a "be polite" that made the dragon roll his eye toward Oberyn in what he fancied was a look of shared amusement. Oberyn did what Doran had asked because defying his brother in this would have been a particularly stupid way to be proud. He trained the dragon. He learned Sirocco's moods because he had learned long ago to read rooms. A beast was a room with a different roof. He learned that the rolling sound meant contentment and sometimes meant annoyance, that a certain quick set of breaths meant hunger, that when the lip twitched in a way that showed one fang only, Sirocco wanted to make fire and would have teased into it. He learned that hiss was a song in Sirocco's mouth and that no meant nothing to a dragon, but the hand that goes with it meant something. He taught a touch and a sound together until the dragon knew without knowing why. Betel learned alongside him, and there came a morning when the boy stood as high as Oberyn's sternum and took the strap and set Sirocco's foot where they wanted it without flinching when the heat made the hair on his forearm lie down. The boy's burned skin had turned to 2 pale ridges and a web of delicate stippled scars. He had stopped flinching when he laughed. He told stories in the evening of his father without weeping, and his lies about his bravery had grown so happy that Oberyn liked them. A lie that makes a boy stand up straight is a bridge to a truth you might choose to live to. In the 2nd week, a band of Eulers rode near the outer dune and circled as if by accident. They did not behave like men who had come by accident. Obara walked out to meet them with her spear loose in her hand and regarded them with the disdain a woman gives men who drink sour wine when they could afford sweet. Their captain wore his scarf loose in a cocky line that made Oberyn want, forcefully, to punch that line into a better shape. He did not. He let Obara talk. "We have come to look at your pet," the Euler said, showing his teeth. "Bring your eyes closer if you like them," Obara said sedately. "You will see better over there." She pointed to a spot that would have put them downwind of Sirocco's next breath. The Euler's mouth twitched as if his smile had stumbled. "We hear he belongs to Dorne," the Euler said. "He belongs to himself," Obara said, "which is more belonging than anyone in this company can claim." The captain's hand strayed to his hilt because men's hands always strayed to their hilts when told they did not own the world. He looked beyond her to where Oberyn stood with the dragon behind him and made his mouth fix itself into respect by force. "Prince," he said, "Our Lady of Hellholt sends compliments. She asks whether you will lend your beast to help temper steel. The heat is said to be even in a dragon's breath. She would pay for evenness." "We are not hiring him out to blacksmiths," Oberyn said pleasantly. "When we must ruin an enemy's gate, we will take his teeth to that work." Until then, we are busy making him bored to death by our company. You may stay and test whether you bore him or not." The Euler laughed from his chest as if to tell the nearest gods he was not afraid. And he and his men stayed a time and drank the sour wine they had brought and were on their best behavior. One pissed 50 paces from where Oberyn sat. Sirocco lifted his head and blew one short breath, and the stream of piss turned briefly to steam, and the man yelped. The Eulers left before night with their pride dented and their tails rehearsal tight. Illyria's rider returned on the 9th day with a letter in her neat hand. Martin Ironwood listened to me as if I had brought him an old story told with a new cadence. He smiled twice and meant it once. "He told me to tell you he will come. Not because you asked, but because he has never seen a dragon and is tired of pretending he has not wanted to. He will bring too many men. You will feed them and you will forgive him because it will make Dorne breathe out. Do not show him your anger. It is the same color as his, and men do not like to see themselves in another man's eyes. Also, I chose a peach from his table that he did not offer me. It was the best peach I have eaten in a year. This is my way of telling you his cooks are better than ours at this moment." I asked him for the names of his cooks. He declined. I smiled. He smiled. "I will come home soon. Do not fall. Make sure the boy eats. He will forget." Oberyn kissed the paper where her name lay, not because parchment held any magic for him, but because her mouth had pressed on those same letters. He sent back a note that said only come fast and bring your tongue, and did not bother with strategy at all. Their strategies had always traveled the same roads. Ironwood arrived as promised 3 mornings later with banners that did not toss themselves. His party moved like a herd that trusted the man in front. He rode with his chest forward and his shoulders back and his mouth set in a line that had been made in a long-ago doorway by bad news and had never been corrected afterward. He dismounted with care and calculation and a sense of his heels striking sand as a declaration. "Oberyn," he said with very little ceremony, "you bring new weather to our country." "I bring the weather that has always been ours," Oberyn said. "You have looked at it and called it wind. I have called it mine." Ironwood's gaze went past him to Sirocco in a slow degree, the refusal to hurry meaningful as a bow. He did not startle when the dragon moved. He did not pretend boredom. He did not smile. He took the creature in with grave, interested attention, and then looked down at the sand as if it had given him a puzzle to solve. "HRM," he said. "He is not pretty. That is not what we like best about him," Oberyn said. "Pretty things get put on mantles," Ironwood said. "Ugly things get used." His eye cut to Oberyn. "Don't use him so hard he breaks." "Not my plan," Oberyn said. They stood together, 2 men with a long grudging respect that had to be cleaned and turned every few years lest it rot. Ironwood's men watched Sirocco in the way soldiers watch something they will be asked to stand in front of, with love and with an insult in their throats to keep courage easy to find. Illyria kept her smile half asleep. Obara spun her spear in a little idle arc and the leather of her gloves squeaked faint. "Will you fly for me?" Ironwood asked bluntly, like a man asking whether a knife was sharp. "I have never seen the back of a man lean and learn the sky." Oberyn considered refusing and then figured that refusal here would be an act he would regret later. He mounted. He let the Drago and find the first lift. They went up and around, not high, not showy, but with enough that men's mouths opened because men's mouths do that when the impossible passes overhead. When he came down, Ironwood nodded once, as if a proof had been given and accepted. "Send to me when you mean to move," Ironwood said. "If you mean to move." "I mean to move," Oberyn said, and the heat came into his bones with the saying. "Then I will bring men, not because I think you are wise, but because I think you are inevitable," Ironwood said, which was as generous as a benediction between them. He left with dust that rose and then lay down again like a final word. Dorne watched all of it with the expression of a man who has been told the sea has invented a new tide and is determined not to admit to his own excitement. He spoke to Oberyn that night from his couch with the lanterns turned low and the scent of lemon leaves padlocked behind the shutters. "You will take him to the border before you take him over it," he said, very mild. "You will make him look at the sands where our books say dragons once did not like to fly. You will see if our books lie because their writers were lazy. You will not fly over the boneway like a boy showing off his new shoes on a muddy day. You will be born to winter if you do that. It will make our carefully chosen allies into men who remember that they owe us things and do not like being reminded. Border, Oberyn said, agreeing. Then the passes. Then the King's Road. Then the city. Then their fear. He smiled at his brother as if the smile could soften the words. I will not burn them. I will frighten them. Fright is honest. It is a thing that a man cannot lie to himself about. Men lie to themselves about anything, Dorne said. You count oars, he added gently. Make sure one of those ships is the one you will take when all of this has gone very badly, and you must not let me see that you are bleeding. Oberyn touched the back of his brother's hand. I will not bring the dragon into your chambers, he said. That is a ship I can burn for you. They trained Sirocco to carry weight and then to carry the shape of a long, low bundle that men's eyes would pretend was a siege engine. They trained him to land on stone. They trained him to take off with a body that had gone suddenly too still behind his shoulder because men faint in terrible moments and you cannot wait for Jory to wake. They trained him to be bored by music and to be flattered by applause, because men bring drums and men shout, and it is good to make the beasts think both are a gift from you. At the border spurs of the Red Mountains, they found an updraft that Kella named as if it were a friend. Here, she said, her finger a needle to the air. Here he will learn to be lazy. Here you will not have to work your spine until you hate me. They flew there, and Oberyn let the dragon teach him something new. That you can go higher by doing less if you choose the right place for doing less. He filed that away for later as if it were gold and not a rule about air. They went as far as the Prince's Pass, and the wind there smelled different and carried with it the tired breath of travelers and far kitchens and the sadness of widows with no interest in why they were sad. Sirocco disliked the smell. Oberyn let him turn his head away from it. There was no sense picking a fight with the air. 2 goats later, they were both in better humor. On a gray morning when the sea had become a sheet of iron hammered by a poor smith, a raven with a ringed leg came down onto the Tower of the Sun and made a boy swear with surprise. The ring had a lion on it. Areo took the bird with so little motion that the bird did not realize it had been taken until the hand closed. Dorne read the letter and his mouth tightened to a small plain line. They invite you to King's Landing, Dorne said to Oberyn, who already knew. The city had begun to throw its lines out as soon as someone near Salt Shore had found the courage to write and ask whether what he'd heard was true. They invite me to send a man I trust. They ask that we bring no one else of consequence. They say they wish to talk about the matter of justice. They use the word justice like a word they have learned in a school and not a word they have ever said over a river. Oberyn Martell, Oberyn said, Prince of Dorne, I am a man I trust. Doran's eyes were not large, but now they looked like a dark thing looking out of a small window. You will not take him, he said. Oberyn did not say, I will. He did not say, try to stop me. He said, because sometimes the easiest way to let your brother live with you was to be honest in a measured quantity. I will not land him in their yard. He curled his mouth into something not quite a smile. No matter how proud their banners are. Take Obara, Dorne said. Take Tyene. Leave Nymeria here. I need a liar as good as me to talk to men who will want to count our goats. If you see the lion, tell him a story about a goat he has never liked and then laugh. He will not be pleased. I will take Ilaria, Oberyn said. Ilaria lifted a brow. Oh, they will want to punish me with their eyes, Oberyn said. You are good for the part of me that wants to try to win a staring contest with every man at a long table. You will scratch my ankle under the table when I become greedy and I will stop. Will you? She asked, amused. Yes, he said. Because when you scratch my ankle it goes straight up my thigh, and I remember that there are better uses for my cleverness. Ilaria laughed her true laugh, and Tyene hid her smile behind her hand like a girl, and Obara tipped her spear to take the sunlight along its length as if checking for cracks. Areo stood still and rearranged the map of the room in his head, so there was always something between Oberyn and the door and some other something between Ilaria and the knives any man who loved power laid his din. Where? The day they left for the Boneway, Sirocco blew on Oberyn's shoulder with that low harumph sound and then rubbed his lip against the strap as if they had a private joke. Oberyn put his head briefly against the dragon's jaw, that meeting of soft and hard, and whispered the names of 2 children into scale, not because he believed in blessings but because he believed in remembering that is made public. They flew at dawn, because the air is clean at dawn and men's ambitions are not yet up and dressed. The passes showed their teeth. The wind sang its own cautions. Obara's horse threw its tail like an insult and then remembered that she owned it. Ilaria, in her traveling clothes that made her look like a boy and made between her legs a weather that Oberyn had never been immune to, rode with her head up and took the air into herself like a second heart. Tyene smiled at men on the road and left behind her a scent that made those men forget where they'd been going. They did not fly over the pass. They flew along it, a shadow on the stone that would later be described as Hawkshadow by those who did not wish to believe the truth, because believing it would make their dreams as nights less restful. They came down at a high shelf where a spring made an improbable green and men had gnawed their lunch 1,000 times, and they drank from it like honest travelers. A man in a black and yellow cloak watched them from a distance with a spear that had not been polished in a month because a child had been sick and he had held that child for 3 nights instead of caring for his medal. He did not run, did not challenge. He put his spear butt down and watched in a way that told Oberyn he would tell the story later without trying to change the parts that made him afraid. King's Landing called itself the heart of the world, but a dragon carrying a Dornish prince did not need the city to be a heart because his was beating plenty. They came to the city by the river mouth, not the road, and they chose a spit of mud to land on that was high tide at one end and fully dry at the other, required by Doran's caution and by Oberyn's new understanding for the mechanics of showing off. Obara announced them to the gate guards using her bored voice that frightened men more than her spear. Obara Sand, Tyene Sand, Ilaria Sand if she chooses to be called it, Oberyn Martell, a prince and an animal, she said. We are here to eat and to insult your furniture. Where is the list I must sign? The guards were men who had survived their elations. They did not argue. One ran. One did not. The one who did not sent a boy for a man who wore a chain of keys and had his hair like a resentment. The keyman tried on several faces and finally chose a face like patience. He looked somewhere slightly to the left of Sirocco, which was the right amount of respect. Your rooms are prepared, he said. You are to go up at once. Do not try to tell my beast where to go, Oberyn said gently. He will go where I ask if you decide to please me. We do not permit, the keyman began, and then Tyene took his arm briefly in hers the way a niece takes an uncle's when she catches him in a garden and needs him to remember how to smile. We will be careful with all our steps, Tyene said gravely. Make sure no children crowd. They will want to climb without understanding the fall. The keyman forgot himself for a moment. He looked at Tyene as men look at the very first warm day in spring. Then he bowed. Of course, he said. He gestured to the boy with a jerk of his head that was, in a city like this, as good as a benediction. The boy ran. They went up the riverside as the city found itself looking. Crowds grew as if being poured out of bowls. Oberyn's smile had learned to be cruel and charming both. He used the charming version now and kept the cruel one in his pocket like a small blade. Sirocco hissed once because someone had thrown something that smelled of spoiled guts. The thing fell short. A few men near the front started to sing something, then trailed away when the sound of the dragon's breath rolled across the stones and made their song sound mean and small. At the great steps, a line of gold cloaks waited, and beyond them, the Lannister red roped off the way a man ropes off his pride. The hand was not there. The hand would not be there. The queen was not there. She would never be where she might not be the center. A man in Kingsguard white came out instead, wearing honor poorly like a borrowed shirt. He did not kneel. He did not smile. His mouth was a thin line of duty drawn with a ruler. Prince Oberyn, he said. Welcome. You honor the city. And you... He looked at Sirocco in the way brave men look at a thing that might make brave look like something else entirely. You honor the city also. This is Sirocco, Oberyn said. He prefers goats. He had not meant to make the joke again. It had become in his mouth a charm against the visible tension and the invisible terror and his own sudden temptation to say something grand and ruinous. "You will not bring it within the gates," the White Knight said, just polite enough to be a man rather than a square of painted armor speaking. "You will tie it here on this side. We have arranged a place." "You will not," Oberyn said, and made his own voice a soft blade. "He has no tie. He does not know rope except as a language spoken by my hands. He will be spoken to by my hands and not by yours." Ilaria chided the air with a small click of her tongue, very subtle. It was the ankle scratch she had promised. He let it crawl up his leg and damp his anger to manageable flame. "Where do you suggest I let him sleep?" Oberyn asked, reasonable, as if discussing upholstery. "I cannot persuade him to take a room." The White Knight's jaw ticked. He flicked his fingers. A squire unaware of the stage responded with a half-run and nearly knocked himself on his sword hilt. "The old shipyard is clear," the knight said. "The timbers are gone. There is stone. There is water. It is secure. For your animal. For the city," Oberyn said. "I will see it." He felt Sirocco lean into his hand a fraction and understood that the dragon was beginning to permit all this as if it were a play staged by cavemen. He would tolerate it so long as the meat kept appearing at the right hours. They left the dragon on the stone of the old shipyard with men posted in a ring farther away than they wanted to be. A dozen goats went in the same circle, a pile of pine logs that looked like insulted organ pipes. Sirocco nosed the pine and sneezed once, offended. He would prefer olive wood. He had made this clear already. It made Oberyn briefly want to burn a grove near the King's Road just to prove a point. He did not. They went up into the castle and were taken past the empty niches where the skulls had once made men walk softer, and into rooms that had always smelled to Oberyn of men who dressed too often in velvet and not enough in sweat. Tyene drifted, a soundless swath of scent and smile. Obara made a habit of looking at maps on walls with the disdain she saved for good recipes. Ilaria laughed at a portrait in which a woman strove so industriously to be beautiful that she had become a monument. When the hand of the king came at last to sit at a too long table to speak in the thin way men speak, when they think they have arranged all the pieces carefully and resent that a live animal has trotted through the room, Oberyn found that he was calm. His anger was not ablaze. It was the iron warmth of a pot that had simmered an hour. He could put a finger to it and not be burned. "My prince," the hand said. He was a small man in the way that nettles are small. "We are honored." "I am glad you think so," Oberyn said. "I have always been famous for my hospitality." "We have heard," the hand said, "that you have come with an animal. We assume you brought it as a symbol." "It breathes," Oberyn said. "It burns. It is not a symbol." "A sign of friendship," the hand said blandly. "A sign that breathes," Oberyn repeated, and smiled his oldest clean, wicked smile. "It makes friendship so much warmer." Cersei came late, of course. She drifted in with a son like a pet at her side and eyes that surveyed the table as if it were a bed she would share with no one. She sat without being asked to sit and arranged her skirt with that fussy, angry grace of hers and finally smiled at Oberyn as if the son had done her a favor. "Prince Oberyn," she said, "we were wondering when you would do something interesting." He laughed because to not laugh would have been a small treason. He had always fancied himself immune to her charms because he recognized her crime. "I have been doing interesting things all my life," he said. "I have merely done them out of your sight. That was the interesting part." Tyene hid her smile again. Obara's face did not change, and yet every line of it softened with a quiet contempt. Ilaria looked at the queen with a polite disinterest that only a woman who has had very good lovers can manage. They talked. The talk had the color and temperature of water drawn from a deep well on a hot day. At first shocking and then numbing, then refreshing again if you allowed for the taste of iron. Oberyn said justice and said the names he had said 1,000 nights into the dark when the faces of his daughters were turned away in sleep. The men opposite him said words the way merchants place weights on a scale, testing, computing, pretending at fairness. Cersei watched him as if weighing the sport of this against the cost in her dignity. The king peered once at Tyene, as if she were a cake on a high plate, and then looked away miserably. "You have a dragon," the hand said finally, "because in the end men must come to the thing they are afraid of in a room. Dragons do not win arguments. They start fires." "Some arguments deserve fires," Oberyn said. "We do not," the hand said. "Admit the principle." "Then admit me," Oberyn said, smiling still. It was not charm now. It was a blade whose polish was so fine that men forgot it was there. "I am not a principle. I am a man. I will have justice. You may have my dragon look down upon your roof and leave your banners unburned. And you may say that you did right. That is a story you will like telling yourself. Or you may hear the sound his breath makes and not like the way it shakes your heart inside your chest." The hand leaned back, and Oberyn saw then, again, what he had always known. That men who are certain grow smaller when it is pointed out to them that certainty has a cost. The hand's mouth folded into thought. "We will consider," he said. "You have had many years to consider," Oberyn said. "This is the part where you decide." "Prince Oberyn," Cersei said smoothly. "We decide. We are the deciders. We are the ones who sit. You are the one who rides a beast and thinks that makes you wise." "I do not think it makes me wise," Oberyn said. "I think it makes me tall." He put his hand flat on the table as if swearing. "I will not eat at this table again unless you send me word that you intend to hand me a man whose head I came here to see separated from his body. When you send me that word, I will come, and I will drink your wine, and I will leave with what is owed to me." The king, who had been playing with a knife, set it down suddenly, and his face went quite blank. He said in a voice that had not yet learned itself, "My mother says that men who threaten the court end up dead." "My mother says we all do," Oberyn said, and pushed back his chair and stood. They left in the long shadows of late afternoon. The city had turned the story into 12 stories, and the goat sellers had doubled their prices, and a man was selling bits of sticks that were not from the dragon's den, and calling them dragon wood and being believed. Sirocco lifted his head when Oberyn put a hand under his jaw and breathed, and the heat rolled over Oberyn's knuckles like a benediction. They slept in the shipyard under guard. They left at dawn with a shadow on the Red Keep that was not the shadow the king's architect had planned for. They did not fly straight home. Oberyn took them over the Rose Road, low, slow, not to terrify peasants who had not committed any sins beyond the usual, but to let the rumor grow as if it were vines on a stone wall. He watched a plow team stumble and then keep on with its small, stubborn work. He watched two boys fight for laughter with sticks and stop to point and then return to whacking each other with new zeal. He watched a baker drop a tray and curse. He watched, and for a brief, bitter instant, he loved the way the world kept doing its tiny work even under great shadows. He loved it and knew it would ruin him if he let it pull him from his purpose. Back at Sunspear, Dorne said nothing at first. He watched his brother with that quiet exhaustion that had never stopped being kind. He waited until night, until the sound of water in the gardens had a private feeling to it, and then said, "I am not a god. I cannot hold all this in my hands." "I am not asking you to," Oberyn said. "I am asking you to let me. This is the only size of action that has ever fit me." "Then let it fit," Dorne murmured. "Let it not own you." Ilaria laid her head on Oberyn's chest and breathed there. "What did their walls smell like?" she asked, not lifting her head. "Old wine and piss and cost," he said. "Like a feast where someone has been sick in the corner and servants have made the smell go away but not the knowledge." She laughed. "I have been at such feasts." He lay awake after she slept and made a list he did not write. A list of what he owed. A list of who he would hurt if he went on. A list of the ways he would forgive himself later, and a list of the things he would never forgive. He thought of Sirocco's lip, that place where softness touched armor. He touched the inside of his own wrist and felt the raised place, the little ridge where heat had once kissed him. He covered it with his other hand as if to keep air out. He slept and dreamed of sand turned to glass, of a boy named Badel standing on a dune with a look that was both old and clean, of a girl's laugh in a pool, of a hill in a red and gold city and a shadow like an admission. At dawn, A rider came in spattered and wild-eyed. Areo took him by the shoulders and shook him once, gently, and the words came. The words were about a small garrison at the edge of the Prince's Pass, about a party of Sellswords testing bravery and boredom, about 2 men dead and 3 wounded and a banner taken. Areo looked at Oberyn, and Oberyn looked back, and neither said anything like wait. Not city, Dorne said from the threshold, where he had dragged the weight of his aching foot and did not look at it. Not the great lion, not yet. It will make us small to leap and be swatted. Pick something we can carry in our hands. The banner, Oberyn said. We will take it back and leave them melted iron where their food ought to be. Take men, Dorne said. Take too many. Let them say you are afraid. They will be wrong. He took men. He took Obara and Tyene and Areo and 10. He could have named in the dark by the sound of their padded feet. Ilaria would have come. He forbade it without words by touching her face the way a man touches a poem he cannot quote without crying. She nodded once, furious and understanding. They flew ahead to show the garrison that rescue was a thing made of breath and shadow as well as of spears. Sirocco took to the air as if the argument with height had been settled while Oberyn slept. The wind at the pass met them with its old suspicion. He leaned into it and reminded his belly that falling was a lie he bent to. Below, the garrison lay like a handful of tiles on a table. Men ran and then stopped and shaded their eyes and then ran again in a different direction because they remembered they had duties besides marveling. Smoke lifted where an old cookfire had been taught new language by a kicked log. The Sellswords were the kind that called themselves a company and had a name that made women laugh in their sleeves when it was said aloud. Half in mismatched mail, half shirtless. A captain with a scar that had twisted his smile into something sour and showy. Their horses hard in the body with the particular cruel hardness of men who are ridden too far by greed. They looked up and then looked at one another. A weapon had arrived that they could not sell to the next lord. They were annoyed. Oberyn came down hard between them and the garrison's outer wall. Not high, not dramatic. A wall of heat and scale saying we are an inconvenience you cannot negotiate away. He looked at the captain's smile and saw there the anger of being deprived of a fair fight. He knew that anger. He also knew the answer to it. Leave the banner, he said, pleasant as a candlelight. Leave the men. Leave your captain if you like. He looks heavy. Take your teeth. It is an old Dornish courtesy. The captain spat on the sand. It made a dark spot like a lie on a ledger. We came for sport, he said. We found a circus. Circus? Oberyn repeated, and the word made his mouth want to laugh. I have always wanted to be a juggler. He reached forward and took the strap into the hand he used to do work without discussions. He turned Sirocco's head half a degree to the left and tapped the plate at his jaw twice. Very light. The dragon made the small exhale, not even a fire this time, a breath that sent heat forward like a slap, and the horses of the Sellswords leapt sideways in a single ridiculous neighing motion as if their mothers had all been sisters. Men swore and fought their mounts for faces. Leave the banner, Oberyn said again. Leave your captain if you like. Leave him a waterskin. We are not their kind of cruel. One man reached for a bow. Areo's axe took the bow out of the man's hand from 40 paces away with a spin that looked like an afterthought. Obara stood with her spear not just still but static, as if it had sunk its metal into the idea of a man. Tyene smiled at a boy whose beard did not yet grow in even, and the boy's face went an odd color, and he looked down at his hands as if they had misbehaved. The captain's smile tried to move and discovered that it could not without making his whole face into a mistake. We will take the banner, the captain said. We will take our men. You will take the lesson, Oberyn said. You will tell it in the taverns that hire you. You will make it cheap so that all men can afford to hear it. It will be a story about how smart you were to leave and how proud you were to keep your men alive. He leaned forward on the saddle and let the dragon's lip brush his knee. The heat came through leather and skin to bone. You will change the ending if you like, he added. Men do. The important part will be the middle where you go away. They went. Takes nothing to frighten brave men. Takes breath. They left the banner and a small heap of swords and one man's boots, because men always forget boots when their minds are running faster than their legs. Badel lifted the banner with an expression that would have looked pompous on any other boy and looked beautiful on this one. He held it upright though his arm trembled and the healed burns pulled, and he did not complain. They took the banner back and Dorne touched it briefly as if it contained a relic. "Good," he said softly. "Good. Cook them dinner and let them sleep." They slept. They dreamt of fire and were not afraid. When Ellaria returned from Ironwood, she put her head under Sirocco's jaw, as if she were nodding to a great venerable aunt. "There will be a wedding," she said. "Not ours. A marriage of convenience, which is to say a form of honest blackmail. It will keep us from cutting one another for a season. It will make men bored. Boredom is a good wall." "Whose hand?" Dorne asked. She told him. He nodded once very slowly, and the relief that moved through him could have been mistaken for a draft. "Good," he said. "I always liked that girl." "There is something else," Ellaria said, frowning. "At Ironwood there was a man who smelled like Old Town. He asked me 2 questions about the dragon. He did not look at me while he asked. He looked at the door. He is not a maester. He is someone who likes to be near people who touch books. He is thin where the soul is. Send a name to me when it comes," Dorne said. "We will ask our rabbits in Old Town whether one of their number is missing. We will ask them gently. We will not show them our teeth." Summer leaned forward. Sirocco grew a hand's breadth along his neck. The plates at his jaw hardened, and the soft skin between became supple and thick. He learned to turn a circle in the air without losing height, and then to climb on an angle that made Oberyn's belly forget and remember its lesson 3 times. He learned to sleep on stone without sliding. He learned that olive wood pleased him and pine did not. He learned that the sound of little bells tied to Ellaria's ankle meant, "Do not move," when she lay in the dragon's partial shade in the afternoon and used him like a poor wall. There was a night when the wind came from the sea with the kind of confidence that makes men say things upstairs they will repudiate in the morning, and Oberyn went walking the long open walk where the water talks to a man whether he wants it to or not. He carried no spear and his wrist felt light, and he thought that if he had been another man altogether he would have been a priest. Ellaria found him there and leaned against the parapet and said nothing for a long time. At last, "You will be the man who burns a city, or you will be the man who almost did. Do you not like the part where I am the man who does not?" he asked, half a smile. "I like any part where we are not burying children," she said. "I prefer the parts where you open my thighs and make it impossible for me to think about sorrow. But I did not choose a man because he would keep me free of sorrow. I chose a man who would not lie to me about how the world is. Do not lie to me now. Tell me which man you are." "I am the man who will hold a breath in his chest like a coin and spend it in the right place," he said. "I am the man who will look down and not drop the match until the match matters. I am the man who will bring the mountain down without even having to strike it if I can manage it. I am the man who will strike if I cannot." "Good," she said. "If you had said you were the man who will not strike, I would have left you." He looked at her with a love that felt almost decent and almost not like a sin. "I know," he said. By the end of that week, letters came that made Dorne hold his temples as if there were a bird flying back and forth inside a cage there. The Reach had sent poems. The Stormlands had sent wine. Old Town sent a list of the names of dragons that someone had written when he was nervous about dying and wanted his deaths for company. And from King's Landing came a packet of legal words that tried to bind reality in leather straps and failed, and nothing but irritation showed through. "Justice is a girl's name in this city," Dorne said, dropping the parchment with distaste. "They send her to dance at other men's parties. No one asks what she wants. Justice wants heat," Oberyn said. "She wants her bread baked all the way through." "You will be an oven," Dorne said, almost smiling. "Do not burn the house." It was Ellaria who came to him in the hour before dawn 2 days later and said, with the simplicity of women who have carried pain long enough to fold it neatly, "They have sent a man without a name to ask you to be patient." "Who?" Oberyn asked, because his mind always wrote in proper nouns first. "She Smee." Led a little for the first time that night. You will like him because he is proud and he is undone by his own pride, and he is funny in a way he does not know how to exploit. When he met the man, cloak too plain for a noble, voice too careful for a soldier, a scar that marked him as one of those men the crown sends to do work that leaves dirt under the nails of the soul. He found he did like him. The man stood with his hands folded in the nonchalant idiom of a liar and said, "They ask for time. They have had time," Oberyn said. "They have had all of the time." He raised his hand for silence when the man's mouth opened to attempt an argument. "Tell them I will give them 3 days and a morning. On the morning of the 4th day, I will make a mark on their city that they can wash away if they like but will never stop smelling. No one has forgotten the smell of the last time dragonfire touched these stones. I will remind them the memory can have new chapters." The man bowed. He did not ask for more. He understood, intelligent enough to hate the way intelligence sometimes served fear, that he had been given an amount of mercy. He looked at Ilaria briefly with a gratitude he could not afford to voice. He left. Oberyn stood there for a time with his hand still lifted, and then set it down on his own thigh to keep it from trembling. 3 days and a morning. The day counted itself down. The dragon slept. The city hummed. The little one Bellum, a boy with a face like a map of every sort of mischief who had once looked at Oberyn as if he were a storybook and now looked at him as if he were an uncle, asked if he could touch the dragon and when told no, touched its scale anyway with the quickness of an eel. Sirocco breathed on him. The boy laughed and lied about not being afraid. On the morning of the 4th day, Oberyn woke with the kind of temperate purpose that makes men give orders in low voices and have them obeyed. He kissed Ilaria before she opened her eyes. He put his forearm to Sirocco's lip and waited until the dragon made the stone-rolling sound. He told Badel to keep watch over the goats and not let any man with a red and gold ribbon near the pen. He mounted. The sky over King's Landing was that sort of blue that only water understands. The white gulls made the right kind of music. The dragon took the wind into his wide mouth and the wind permitted it. They came along the city side like a shadow that had decided to be honest and stick close to the body. The red keep rose. The city was a warren. Men were very small. He did not make fire. He let Sirocco's heat fall along the outer southern wall as a single long exhale. Stone blackened in a narrow band. The sound it made was like a sigh given back by built things. 100 men saw what was happening and ran, and another 100 froze, and a handful laughed harshly, and a handful cried, and one woman looked up and dropped her wash and raised both hands the way women do when they see a thing that will make their grandchildren talk. The dragon passed, and the stone kept its new color. He turned again, lower, the way a hawk will when it wishes to be admired. He breathed again along a different line. The city understood then, not the men who sent letters, not the women who embroidered banners, but the city itself, which is a beast and not a set of stones. It understood that something had happened to its skin. It did not like it. Oberyn felt the hunch of it under him, though he could not have explained that feeling to any man in words. He rose, because any second breath can spoil the taste of a meal if you are greedy. Across the river, where the houses had fewer noses in their business and the smell was less of ambition and more of honest rot, he left a kiss on a roof. It burned and then went out because the wood there had swollen with last night's fog. He had planned for that. He had wanted to show them control as much as he wanted to show them heat. He was circling back for the last pass when a sound like an insult made of steel rose from the top of a tower. A cranked scorpion, a great one, its sinews oiled by men who thought ahead. He saw the arm rise, and then he did what a proud man does when he has learned some small portion of sense. He did not pretend he had time to be brave. He let Sirocco drop and turn, and the bolt went by above him, a black sudden rule, and made a sound like what a man hears when someone he loves lies too well. It shattered on stone, and 100 men who had been brave in advance trembled afterward, which is a normal order of operations for courage. He did not fire again. He let the wind lift them and carried that insult away on his shoulder like a lover's tooth mark. He rose and he went, and the city lay under him with its new dark lines like a hand that had been burned in a kitchen and would heal but would always tell that story to any lover who kissed it. He did not feel triumph. He felt something more like the completion of an arithmetic problem, the sums he and Dorne had counted aloud, 1 ship, 2, 3. At Sunspear, men gathered to count his courage for him. He did not permit them. He went to Dorne and knelt and said, "I did the thing," like a boy who had broken a bottle and told on himself. Dorne touched his hair with 2 fingers. "Good," he said. "Now wait." Waiting had never been Oberyn's gift. He did it anyway. He taught Sirocco to step away from the kindle when a boy's silly feet were too close. He taught him to lower his head into Illyria's lap without sniffing too at her thighs. He taught him the meaning of the slap of a palm and of the words enough and later. He taught himself to sleep between cups of wine without dreaming about the angle of a bolt arcing toward meat. On the 2nd day of waiting, a raven came with a scrap of parchment that had the smell of decision rather than of wax. The hand that delivered it was Ario's. The unreadable half-smile on Doran's face when he held it out was a plane Oberyn had landed on 1,000 times and had never grown bored of. "From the hand," Dorne said. Oberyn took it. He read, "Come, bring no beast, bring your tongue. There will be a head." He looked up at Dorne. "Go," Dorne said. "Go before they change their minds." He went. He took Obara, he took Tyene, he took Illyria. He left Sirocco with Badel and Ario and a ring of men whose hands would do and whose hearts would not fail. He left his heat behind and took only anger under his tongue like a pepper seed. He went, and the worst of it was that King's Landing kept its word. There was a head. It was not the head he had dreamt of, not as he had dreamt of it. The hair was wrong, the mouth too small, the eyes too dead. He was not a god. He did not know whether it belonged to the man he wanted. He had been given a thing the city insisted was justice, and if he chose to say it was not, he would become the man who had turned down bread out of pride. He did not wish to be that man. He took the head. He took the sound Cersei made when he did, a little sound of triumph folded and hidden in paper, and he put it in his pocket. He left a line burned into the stone of their southern wall to keep him company. When he returned, Badel had news of a different sort. The boy stood in a posture that tried on maturity like a stolen cloak. "He made a new sound," Badel said, eyes bright. "A new one?" Oberyn asked, kneeling to make his face nearer to the boy's. "Yes," the boy said, "like when the wind gets inside a jar and cannot decide whether to come out or to sing." Oberyn rose and went to Sirocco, who lay with his lip on the sand and his eye a bright coin. He put his forearm under the lip without thinking, the way a man throws his arm across a lover's waist in the night without waking, and Sirocco made the sound. It was a hum that could not come from any instrument made by a man because men do not build instruments big enough to hold that note. It made the breath in his chest change its mind about the order in which it should go in and out. It made the hair along his thighs stir on their own. It made something in him that had been a blade a very long time become, for one heartbeat, a plow. "Ah," he said softly, "we are getting ready to be very impolite indeed." Illyria, who had come silently as breath has a way of doing when it loves a thing that might make it short someday, pressed her hand to the plate under Sirocco's jaw. "When you make that sound," she said, "I will climb to the roof with a sheet and show you the wind. That will be my way of making prayer." "Do not learn a god," he said. "I will not," she said. "I will invent one. If I like it, I will keep it." He put his forehead against dragon and skin, that border of hard and soft, and closed his eyes not to pray and not to deny the temptation but to hold both. In the darkness there, he saw Dorne's long lines. He saw a list of ships. He saw a city with a black line across a wall and men who would deny forever that they had smelled what they had smelled. He saw a mountain that had begun to move because men had called it a story too often and someone had had to prove them wrong. "We will go slow," he said into the place where words were heat and heat was words. "We will go slow, and then, when it is time not to be slow, we will show them what speed is." Sirocco breathed, and the morning rose, and beyond it future days lined themselves up like clay pots, some empty, some cracked, some full, some with their lips chipped. He would fill them, he told himself. He would choose which to break. He had always said he would not die in a bed. He looked at all those pots and thought perhaps, just once, He might invent a bed that could keep him in it when the time came, just long enough to tell his brother a good lie and his daughters a very useful truth and Ilaria a dirty joke. And then he would slide out and make a shape in the sand that the wind would argue with for an hour, and then the wind would win. Some men call that hope. Oberyn had never liked to be caught in such terms. He called it the work of the day. He set his hand to it. He did not look up to see whether the gods approved. He had always preferred to ask the dragon, and the dragon, right now, was hungry.